The night begins with a smell I can't quite name. Something sour drifting through the alleys, something that clings to the brickwork like a warning. I'm walking past shuttered windows, the gas lamps trembling in the wind, and somewhere far off a church bell rings long after midnight. London feels tense tonight, tighter than usual, as if the whole city has drawn one deep breath and refuses to let it go. Word spreads quickly here. A body found in Broad Street, another on Whitechapel Road. And now the whispers. The disease is back, and the doctors are to blame. People stop me as I move through the fog, asking if I've heard, asking if it's true, asking if those men in black coats are really taking the sick away and never giving them back. Fear makes strange things feel real, footsteps behind you, shadows that seem to follow. You can almost hear the city muttering under its breath. And while we walk this narrow line between rumour and dread, subscribe and stay with me. Tonight's path winds through fear, suspicion, and the echo of footsteps that never belonged to the living. These were the nights when even doctors hid from their own patients. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? The past is never as distant as it seems. By dawn, the first stones will fly. Crowds will gather at hospital doors. In neighbourhoods where the poor lived shoulder to shoulder, belief hardened into certainty. Cholera wasn't a disease of water or filth. It was a trap, a conspiracy, a killing. And those carrying the medical bags were marked as enemies. So follow me deeper into these streets of soot and panic, where even the men who tried to save lives feared for their own. This is the story of the Cholera Riots, when terror turned Victorian London against its healers, and survival meant choosing whom to trust in a city drowning in fear. You hear it long before you understand it, an unsettled murmur sliding beneath the doors of Broad Street as dawn struggles to lift itself over the rooftops. You move through the grey light, footsteps soft, the cobblestones still slick from the night's thin drizzle. The city hasn't woken yet, the milk carts haven't rattled by, and the shop shutters still hold tight against the cold. Yet something moves here, something faint and trembling, like breath drawn in too sharply. It drifts from window to window, slipping through cracks in brick and bone. Someone died during the night. No details, no names, just the kind of whisper that doesn't need them. The pump stands alone at the centre of the street. Iron handle beaded with moisture, its shadow stretching thin across the stones. You watch as a woman in a frayed shawl approaches it, bucket in hand, hesitating as though the pump itself is listening. She glances over her shoulder once, twice, before lowering her pail beneath the spout. Stories cling to the water now, too many stories. They say a man collapsed here yesterday, his lips pale, his hands cold, taken away before the sun reached its height. They say the water tasted strange. They say the sickness travels through the air, or the walls, or the very breath of the city. No one agrees, but everyone fears the same thing. By the time you reach the end of the street, the whisper sharpens into shape. Someone leans out from a doorway, voice low as if afraid the morning might hear. A labourer, they say, strong as oak, always early to work, found curled beside his own doorstep, eyes wide as frost. Others add details, too many details, some true, some imagined, his face bluish, his wrists damp, his chest hollowing as though the life slipped out in a single gasp. You know how Broad Street treats such tales, first as curiosity, then concern, and finally something darker, something that spreads faster than cold wind. A shopkeeper sweeps his threshold, each stroke of the broom louder than the last, as his nerves fray. He mutters that the doctors came too quickly, that they carried the body away before the neighbours could see him properly. That's how suspicion grows here, not with shouting, but with soft, uneven pieces of a story that don't quite fit. You watch it move through the morning like smoke, curling into doorways, and through the cracks of every uncertain mind. The city has seen sickness before, but not like this. Not something that takes a man so suddenly, so silently, leaving nothing but a mark upon the street and a tremor beneath the skin of everyone who walks it. And as Broad Street begins to stir, lanterns dimming, shop signs creaking awake, you feel it settle into the pit of your stomach. This whisper is not going away. It will cling to the pumps, the water, the air itself. It will spill into neighboring lanes by noon. It will twist itself into rumor by dusk. And by tonight, it will no longer be a single death on a quiet street. It will be the beginning of a city learning to fear its own healers. Golden Lane is quieter than Broad Street, but the quiet here feels heavier, as though the air itself hesitates before moving. You reach it just as the sun climbs weakly over the chimneys, turning the smoke a washed-out brown. The row of houses sits close together, leaning like old companions whispering over shared secrets. But one stands apart, not in appearance, but in silence. Its door is boarded from the inside, and a single scrap of cloth hangs from the upper window, as if left behind in haste. You stop a few steps away, listening. No voices, no footsteps, just the low hum of London's morning breath, thick with unease. The neighbours avoid looking at the house directly. A woman sweeping her stoop keeps her eyes fixed on the dust at her feet, but you see her glance sideways once, then glance away as though she fears the boards might look back. An older man pauses by his gate, knuckles white around a folded newspaper he hasn't opened. He nods toward the shuttered house but says nothing, because here, words can be dangerous. Words suggest certainty, and certainty is something Golden Lane no longer possesses. Someone died in that house, no one disputes that. But what happened after is a different story depending on who you ask. Some say the sickness took the man in a matter of hours, leaving his family terrified to touch his body. Others whisper that men in long coats arrived before dawn, demanding entry, speaking softly but carrying tools that glimmered like metal promises. They were let inside, but only the doctors came back out. And when the family tried to follow, the door was nailed shut, sealed with a speed that felt like desperation. There is talk of a widow inside, refusing to leave. Talk of a child crying through the night. Talk of neighbours hearing footsteps long after the doctors left. In the absence of truth, imagination fills the gaps, like water seeping into cracks. A boy selling coal pauses beside you and murmurs that they're hiding something in there, something worse than cholera, something the physicians don't want the rest of London to see. Then he hurries off, as though afraid his own words might reach the wrong ears. You take a step closer. The boards over the windows are rough and newly cut, splintered at the edges. The front door bears long scratches, as if someone tried to pry their way out or pry their way in. A bowl of half-eaten porridge still sits on the windowsill behind the glass, untouched. A coat hangs on a peg. Life paused mid-motion. This is what fear can do. It halts everything, freezes it, traps it behind wooden planks and silence. A young girl emerges from the neighbouring house with a bucket, but instead of heading to the pump, she pours the water onto the street, as though cleansing something invisible. Her mother calls her back sharply, warning her not to linger, not to look, not to think too long about the house that stands too still. By mid-morning, the whisper on Broad Street has drifted here. Slipping under door frames and crawling along baseboards, people gather in small knots, murmuring that the doctors knew the man would die, that they took him not to save him but to study him. They claim the boards were put up to hide the truth, that medicine has grown bold, careless, hungry, and the more the crowd tells the story, the larger it grows, like a shadow cast by a lantern held too close. Before you leave, you place a hand on the cold wood of the boarded door. It offers no warmth, no clue, no trace of what lies inside. Only the faint smell of damp timber and the feeling that whatever happened here is not finished. Golden Lane carries its silence like a wound, and soon the rest of London will feel it too. Morning presses in with a dull, muted heaviness as you turn onto the winding stretch of Whitechapel Road. The market stalls are only beginning to wake, canvas still pulled tight over vegetables and salted fish, and the fog drifts low enough to blur the shapes of early passers-by. But the real weight on the street today isn't the weather, it's the story being carried from person to person like a fragile, trembling ember. A man with blue lips was found here before sunrise. You follow the murmurs to the place where it happened, a narrow gap between a tailor's shop and a small lodging house with crooked shutters. The cobblestones still carry a faint, dark mark where his body lay, shaped as if the earth itself had tried to keep him. No one steps too close. People stand in a loose ring around the stain, not daring to cross into the space where his life left him. It's as though the sickness lingers in the very air, and proximity alone might draw it into their lungs. A baker stands with flour-dusted hands tucked into his apron, eyes moving between the mark and the passing crowd. He says the man was a dock labourer, strong-backed, rarely sick, came home late from the river the night before, complaining of cramps in his stomach, but walked under his own strength. By dawn, he was curled against the wall, skin cold, lips tinted the colour of bruised violets. They say when they turned him over, water poured from his mouth, as if the river had followed him home. Someone else adds another detail: his fingernails had darkened, his eyes sunk deep in their sockets. A woman swears she saw him reaching out, trying to grab hold of something that wasn't there. The stories vary, but they share one thing: speed. Whatever took him moved quickly, leaving no time for prayer, for goodbyes, for anything at all. But the whispers do not end with his death. They widen. A man in a coal-smudged jacket leans close and mutters that the physicians arrived too fast, faster than anyone expected, as if they already knew where to look, as if they had been waiting. He says they inspected the body without fear, without hesitation, touching the skin with strange tools, murmuring to each other in clipped words no one else understood. Some claim they didn't even try to revive him. Others say they took samples, hair, skin, maybe more, before loading him into their cart. The story spreads through the gathering, growing larger with each telling. By the time it reaches the edge of the market, it has become something darker, that his blue lips were a sign not of disease but of poison, and that the doctors knew exactly what had killed him. A pair of constables try to clear the area, urging folks to move on, to let the dead rest. But their presence does little. People linger in doorways, peering from windows, watching with the wary eyes of those who have learned that danger often wears the face of a neighbour or a healer. A cart rattles by, the wheels snapping against the stones. Everyone tenses until they see it is only carrying firewood. Fear has a way of changing the meaning of every sound. You take in the faces around you, tired, anxious, hollow-eyed. This isn't just grief. It's suspicion settling into the bones of the street. The man with the blue lips is no longer just a victim of illness. He has become a symbol, a warning, proof that the sickness is not just killing it, is dividing. And as you turn to leave, the fog thickens, swallowing the stain on the cobblestones until it disappears entirely, as if the street itself cannot bear to remember. But the people will remember. And soon, when enough memories gather into anger, Whitechapel Road will echo with more than whispers. The pump on Broad Street stands in the centre of the square like a relic from a quieter century, its iron handle worn smooth by thousands of hands, its base stained by decades of spilled water. You approach it just as the first cluster of neighbours gathers, their breath rising in faint, uncertain clouds. No one wants to be the first to speak, but everyone feels the same thing pressing against their ribs. Something about the water isn't right. A woman in a faded green shawl steps forward, dipping her tin cup beneath the spout. The water splashes in, clear enough to trick the eye, but she doesn't drink it. She lifts the cup only halfway before bringing it to her nose, pausing. Her brow tightens. She lowers the cup again. A man beside her asks what she smells. She hesitates because once you say something aloud, it becomes harder to chase it back into silence. Finally, she whispers that the water has taken on a strange edge, like metal left too long in the sun. A murmur passes through the small crowd. Some shake their heads, refusing to believe it. Others nod quickly, relieved. Someone else said it first. A shoemaker swears he tasted bitterness yesterday afternoon. A bricklayer claims his daughter complained that it felt thick. Someone else says their tea brewed darker than usual. The descriptions vary: bitter, metallic, sour, heavy, but they share a common root: unease. You watch as the rumors begin to coil around the pump like invisible vines. That little patch of iron and wood has always been the heart of the neighborhood, the place where women exchanged gossip, where children splashed their hands, where workers filled their jugs before the long walk to the docks. Now it sits like an accused thing, silent and ominous in the cold morning air. A grizzled man nudges the stones with his boot and mutters that the pump draws from deep underground. Too deep, he says, to stay untouched if the sickness is spreading. He points to the houses lining the street, naming the ones where people have fallen ill in the last 2 days. He draws a crooked path between them with his finger, ending at the pump. It is not a scientific map, not even a reasonable one. But fear does not demand precision, it demands direction. And now it has one. A young boy darts forward and pulls up a bucket full of water, staring into it as if expecting to see the dead man's reflection. The bucket trembles in his hands. His mother rushes forward, scolding him sharply, snatching the bucket away before dumping it into the gutter. The boy begins to cry, but she does not comfort him. Instead, she grabs his arm and hurries him back home. She has not forgotten the man with the blue lips, nor the shuttered house on Golden Lane. A physician arrives moments later, walking briskly, with a leather satchel bouncing against his hip. He kneels by the pump, inspecting the handle, running his fingers along its joints, sniffing the water himself. His expression remains measured, too measured for the onlookers' liking. Someone in the crowd mutters that the doctors always pretend nothing is wrong, that they hide behind their calm voices and gentle hands while the sickness slips through the streets like a shadow. Another adds that physicians have been known to experiment on the poor. A third insists the water has been tampered with deliberately. You can feel the tension thickening like fog. The doctor senses it too. He stands, offers a few vague words about contamination and caution, and begins to pack up. But as he turns, a shout rises from the back of the crowd. Why were you so quick to touch the water? Why aren't you afraid? The doctor pauses. Too long. That pause is all the crowd needs. Suspicion sharpens into something harder, something with teeth. People step closer, voices overlapping accusations, questions, demands. The doctor grips his satchel, murmuring that he's only here to help. But help is not what they want. They want certainty. They want someone to blame. And he is standing too close to the pump that tasted wrong. You step back, watching as the circle around him tightens. The pump stands silent, indifferent, as though it has seen this kind of fear before. By the time the doctor hurries away, nearly sprinting down Broad Street, the first stone has already been thrown, small, harmless, but loud enough to echo against the brick. The pump remains, the crowd remains, and the wrongness in the water lingers, deep and patient, beneath the earth. Night folds itself tightly over the narrow streets off Leather Lane, muffling footsteps and swallowing the last flickers of lamplight. You walk slowly, hearing only the distant rattle of a carriage and the soft hiss of coal settling in nearby hearths. This part of the city is usually restless, even after dark, children crying, men arguing, someone calling from a window, but tonight the quiet feels unnatural, almost forced. Doors are shut too firmly. Curtains twitch, then go still. It is the kind of silence that follows fear, not sleep. Word has reached you even before you turn the corner. A child was taken from one of these houses, lifted from her sickbed by men in dark coats, who knocked only once before forcing their way inside. No one knows where the mother went. Some say she fainted. Others insist she tried to fight but was held back. The stories shift like smoke depending on who retells them, but one detail never changes. The girl was carried away long before dawn. You find the house easily. You don't need a number. The mood tells you. 3 neighbors stand together outside the door, pretending to speak about the weather, but failing miserably. Their eyes keep drifting toward the upper window where a candle still burns, its flame trembling as if startled by its own reflection. A broken toy horse lies on the step, one wheel missing, its painted smile staring up at the empty night. An older woman finally speaks, her voice cracking under the weight of what she saw. She says the girl had woken screaming just after midnight, clutching at her throat as though the air itself had turned against her. The mother cried for help, but instead of neighbors, the doctors came too quickly, she adds, far too quickly for anyone who hadn't been watching the house already. They entered without waiting for permission, brushing past the mother, examining the child as if she were an object already lost. You listen as the woman describes how rushed the doctors were, how strangely calm. They didn't pray. They didn't speak softly to the child. They didn't look frightened, not even when her breathing faltered. Instead, they exchanged glances, quiet, deliberate, and then wrapped her in a cloth, lifting her from the bed as though death itself sat perched on the headboard. "Where did they take her?" someone asks. The woman shakes her head. "To the hospital," she whispers. But the way she says it makes the word sound like a sentence, not a destination. Across the street, a young man leans against the wall, arms folded, his voice sharp as flint. He claims the doctors have been circling the neighborhood for days, watching, waiting for someone to fall ill. He swears he saw one of them writing something in a book, names, perhaps, or addresses. He doesn't know, but he knows the look on the doctor's face. A kind of expectation, almost satisfaction, and that is how suspicion grows out of fear first, but also out of memory. Memories of body snatchers, of dissecting rooms, of poor men stolen from graveyards and sold to the highest scientific bidder. London has not forgotten those stories. It never could. You glance again at the candle in the upper window. Its light flickers as if something has brushed past it inside. The neighbors swear they heard the mother moving around earlier, pacing, sobbing, begging whatever God might listen to bring her daughter back. But she has not come out. She has not answered their knocks. The house feels sealed, like a wound too raw to touch. A cart passes by at last, wheels clattering over the stones, and every head turns sharply. Not a doctor's cart this time, just vegetables, just morning creeping closer. Still, the dread remains. The child is gone, the door is shut, and the street watches the candle burn lower, afraid of what it will mean when it finally goes out. Tonight, the neighbors will double bolt their doors, and tomorrow, the story of the child carried away at midnight will spread through London, growing heavier, darker, more dangerous with every retelling. The lamps along Clerkenwell Green burn low as you approach, their golden glow softened by a thin veil of mist drifting in from the river. The houses here rise tall and narrow, their brick faces streaked with soot, their windows staring blankly into the street. You can feel the uneasy pacing of the neighborhood even before you hear the first door shut sharply, as though trying to trap something inside or keep something out. Tonight, the sickness prowls like a rumor made flesh, slipping from room to room, unseen but deeply felt. You stop at a modest townhouse with peeling paint and a warped front step. The knocker hangs slightly crooked, as if handled too roughly. This is where the doctor arrived too late, according to everyone who now watches from behind half-open curtains. Too late to save the man inside, too late to explain himself, too late to avoid suspicion. A cold delivery boy hovers near the doorway, shifting his sack from one shoulder to the other. He saw the doctor come at dusk, he says, coat buttoned tight, eyes sharp, hands trembling only slightly as he lifted the brass knocker. He waited after the first knock, then waited again. But no one answered. The boy swears the doctor knew something was wrong long before he pushed the door open and stepped into the shadowed hallway. Inside, the air was heavy with the sour, metallic scent everyone now associates with the sickness. The doctor called out, first softly, then louder, but the only reply was the creak of the floorboards beneath his own boots. He found the sick man in a back room, collapsed beside an overturned chair. His face was pale, lips bluish, eyes half-lidded, as though he had tried to stand and failed. The doctor knelt, testing for a pulse, but his shoulders sagged almost immediately. The man was gone. But this is where the story divides, splitting cleanly into two versions, each carried with equal conviction. Some insist the doctor meant well, that he had been summoned but was delayed by other patients, other emergencies, that he tried to save the man, tried to comfort him, tried to bring calm to the household. They say he stayed a while, speaking gently to the grieving widow, offering to send help. They say he apologized. Others tell a different tale. They claim the doctor hesitated too long before entering the house, as though calculating, waiting. They say he examined the body with cold efficiency, checking the man's limbs, mouth, and pockets before covering him with a sheet. They claim he left quickly, too quickly, as though satisfied with what he found. A woman next door swears she saw him writing something in his notebook before he vanished down the lane. And once doubt settles into a neighborhood, it grows rapidly. By the time you stand there, listening to the coal boy speak, the neighbors have constructed a full narrative. The doctor's lateness was deliberate, they say. He arrived only after the man had died so he could claim the body without witnesses. He took too long alone in the back room. He did not comfort the widow. He frightened her. She has not spoken since. The widow's silence is what cements the story. She has not left the house. She has not opened the curtains. She has not answered a single knock. As the boy finishes his tale, he glances up at the dark windows and whispers that the doctor will not return, not after what happened, not after the angry crowd that formed outside his own lodging house last night. People shouted for answers, for confessions, for explanations he did not or could not give. He slipped out the back door, slipping into the same fog that clings now to Clerkenwell Green. You turn toward the narrow lane where he fled, the mist curling like fingers around the bricks. Somewhere in that darkness, a healer wanders unwelcomed, hunted not by criminals, but by the very people he tried to serve. And behind you, in the shuttered house, the widow sits alone beside her husband's vacant chair, waiting for a knock that will never come. The farther you move toward the edges of Smithfield, the more the night seems to lean in, listening. The streets grow narrower here, framed by leaning houses, whose eaves almost touch overhead. You can hear whispers long before you see the faces that shape them, soft, trembling fragments slipping through shutter slats and under warped doors. It feels as though the entire neighborhood is speaking in secret, afraid that even the fog might carry their words to the wrong ears. You stop near a butcher's shop that has long since closed for the night. Its sign swings gently in the breeze, creaking with a sound that feels too loud for the hour. Beneath it, a group of men huddle around a flickering lantern. Their shadows stretch across the cobblestones like spilled ink. They speak in hushed tones, and when you draw closer, you recognize the fear threading through their voices. The old stories are returning. Stories of body snatchers, of grave robbers, of medical men who pay for what the earth has not yet claimed. It begins with a single tale, always a single tale. A father claims the body of his son disappeared from the infirmary before proper burial could be arranged. He went to see him one last time, he says, but the attendants barred the door. They told him the boy was moved. They did not say where. They did not offer proof. Only apologies spoken too quickly to sound honest. A baker adds another story, leaning close so the lantern's light barely grazes his face. He heard that bodies taken by night are not buried at all. They are carted to the dissecting rooms, the teaching halls, the laboratories, where curious hands pry and cut and label. He speaks the words "cut open" with a shudder, as if saying them might summon the very knives he fears. And then comes the detail that changes everything. Someone claims they saw a doctor carrying a small bundle under his coat, too small to be anything but a child or an infant. The man swears he followed him halfway to Holborn before losing sight of him in the fog. It doesn't matter if the tale is true. In this moment, it becomes true enough. You listen as fear twists the stories further. They begin to mirror the old nightmares from decades past: the Burke and Hare killings, the stolen corpses sold for coin, the rumors of fresh graves uncovered. Those tales never truly died. They simply slept, waiting for a night like this to wake again. And the sickness now sweeping the city gives them new breath, new purpose. A woman steps out from a doorway, pale and trembling, clutching her shawl around her shoulders. She says she heard the doctor's men were marking houses, leaving chalk symbols beside doors where the sick lived. Preparing, she whispers, to collect bodies before they grow cold. Her voice cracks as she speaks, and though the men try to dismiss her words, none of them really do, because in the lantern's dim glow, every face reflects the same thought. What if the doctors are not saving us? What if they are selecting us? Across the square, a constable makes his rounds, tapping his truncheon against the stones with mechanical precision. But even he walks quickly tonight, glancing over his shoulder as though he, too, has heard the whispers carried on the wind. You turn toward the churchyard. Its iron gate looms tall and crooked, and in the weak moonlight, the gravestones seem to lean forward, like mourners listening for news. You can't help but imagine hands pushing up from the earth, or worse, hands pulling down into it. When you leave Smithfield behind, the whispers follow you, clinging to your coat like the damp night air. Rumors, after all, do not need truth to survive, only fear. Morning breaks reluctantly over St. Giles, the light thin and anemic, as though it fears touching the streets below. You move through the narrow lanes where washing lines droop between windows, and the smell of last night's coal fires hangs stubbornly in the air. People are awake earlier than usual, standing in clusters, speaking with the low urgency of those trying not to be overheard. You catch fragments of their whispers as you pass. A mark, a bruise, taken in the night. Your steps lead you to a cramped courtyard behind a row of tenements. Here, a small crowd has gathered, circling something or someone just out of view. The expressions on their faces are a mixture of horror and vindication, as if the thing they feared most has finally revealed itself. As you approach, the group parts slightly, enough for you to see a young man seated on the ground, his back pressed against a damp brick wall. He looks exhausted, trembling, sweat-soaked, but alive. And it is the fact that he is alive that seems to unsettle the others most. A woman leans over him, her hands shaking as she holds up his arm for the others to see. There, on his wrist, just above the pulse, is a faint, bluish imprint, not a natural bruise, not a cut, not a scrape. It is too clean, too circular, too deliberate. A perfect ring of discoloration, as though something cold and precise had pressed there during the night. They marked him, the woman whispers. Same as the others. The courtyard erupts with fearful murmurs. Some swear they have seen such marks before, on the body of a neighbour who died suddenly, on a child who vanished after a doctor's visit, on a woman who was carried out of her home and never returned. Each person contributes a new detail, each detail darker than the last, until the bruise transforms from a simple blemish into a symbol of something monstrous. You crouch beside the young man. His eyes flutter open, glassy and disoriented. His throat works as though swallowing words too heavy to speak. When he finally manages to whisper, his voice is weak but clear. They came while I was sleeping. The courtyard goes still. He describes waking to soft footsteps in his room, then the glint of metal, then hands holding him down. He couldn't see their faces, only the outline of coats, the shape of tools, the faint smell of chemicals. He says he tried to scream, but a cloth pressed against his mouth turned the sound into a suffocated gasp. He remembers the cold pressure on his wrist, and then nothing. A man in the back of the crowd steps forward, voice rough with anger. He insists the mark is proof the doctors are experimenting, testing, selecting the sick before they die. It's easier to believe that than to accept the truth of cholera, because a deliberate enemy can be blamed, fought, hated. A disease cannot. A woman clutches her child tightly, shielding the girl's eyes from the young man's wrist. Another spits on the ground, muttering curses toward the nearest infirmary. A third insists she saw the same mark on her sister's body before the attendants took her away, though whether she truly did or has convinced herself of it hardly matters now. The story has gained its own life. You look again at the bruise. It might be nothing, a pressure mark from how he slept, a trick of color, a bruise forming under fragile skin. It might even be the earliest sign of the sickness itself. But none of that matters here. Not anymore. The crowd has already decided what it means. As the young man trembles, clutching his wrist as though afraid the mark might spread, the courtyard grows louder with accusations. Fear sharpens into fury. Someone suggests marching to the infirmary. Another talks of blocking the doctor's route through the neighborhood. Someone else mentions the word revenge. You stand slowly, feeling the shift in the air. It's subtle but dangerous, like the moment before a match touches dry straw. The bruise on the wrist is no longer just a bruise. It is a spark, and the city, trembling under the weight of sickness and rumor, is ready to burn. The evening settles over Shoreditch with an uneasy stillness, the kind that makes every sound feel sharper, every shadow feel longer. You make your way down a narrow lane where the houses lean in close, their roofs sagging like tired shoulders. Lamps flicker behind grime-coated windows, casting watery reflections onto the cobblestones. The scent of damp wool, sour ale, and smoke settles into your clothes as you walk. This neighborhood is no stranger to hardship, but tonight something heavier hangs in the air, something expectant. It begins with the first bell. Just after dusk, the parish bell tolls a single, long note that echoes across the rooftops. Everyone hears it. Women pause in their doorways, men freeze mid-step, children look up from their chalk games. The bell never rings at that hour unless someone has died. The sound carries the weight of mourning, of inevitability. In times like these, a bell ringing means the sickness has claimed another life. But before the echo fades, a second bell rings, a beat too soon, a note too sharp, and just like that, the street exhales in confusion. Two bells, when only one should have rung. Some say the second bell came from the church. Others swear it sounded from farther away, perhaps from the direction of the infirmary. A few insist it was no bell at all, but a metal instrument struck hurriedly in warning. Whatever it was, the double toll slips under every door in Shoreditch, sinking deep into the marrow of those who hear it. Within minutes, people gather at the corner of Crooked Beam Alley, the place where rumour travels fastest. A man wrapped in a patched coat claims the first bell marked the death of Mrs. Hargreaves, a widow who lived alone above the cobbler's shop. She had been ill for 2 days, he says, but refused to let a doctor inside. She believed the water had made her sick. She believed the doctors would take her away long before the sickness did. But the second bell, that is where the uncertainty begins. A woman clutching a lantern steps forward, voice shaking. She lives 2 doors down from the widow, and she swears she saw men in dark coats enter the building just before the bells rang. They did not knock. They did not speak. They simply walked inside as though they already belonged there. She heard footsteps on the stairs, hurried and heavy. She heard a cry. Then silence. Then the bell. Another neighbor claims he saw those same men slip out the back door moments later, carrying a small object wrapped in cloth. He could not see what it was, only that they moved quickly, heads down, avoiding the light spilling from the tavern across the street. He says they weren't doctors at all, they were collectors. The kind the city whispers about. The kind who have been paid in past years for the freshly departed. Someone mutters that the doctors are taking bodies before families can claim them. Someone else says they are taking the sick before the sickness even finishes its work. Fear threads through the crowd as easily as wind threads through loose shutters. The bell's second toll becomes a symbol, a sign of something being hidden, stolen, taken under cover of darkness. The more people argue about what they heard, the more certain they become that something unnatural happened inside the widow's room. The church door opens at last, and the young curate steps out, looking pale and tired. He insists only one bell was rung. He insists the second sound was a mistake. He insists the widow died peacefully, without interference. But no one believes him. Not tonight. Not with the sickness circling the city like a hungry stray. Not with doctors being seen in places they should not be, at hours when decent men are asleep. As the crowd disperses, the whispers cling to every wall of the lane. The bells rang twice, they say. Twice, when they should have rung once. And tomorrow, when the story spreads beyond Shoreditch, it will carry something new with it, something that can no longer be quieted by reason or prayer. The doctors are taking people. The doctors are hiding something. The doctors are not to be trusted. And in the widening space between fear and truth, the city's first sparks of violence quietly begin to gather. The hospital on Bishopsgate looms taller than the houses around it, a grey slab of stone and shuttered windows that always seems colder than the rest of London. Even on ordinary days, people pass it quickly, heads down, steps quickened as if the building itself watches them. But this morning is no ordinary morning. The sky is the colour of tarnished pewter, the air thick and sour, and a hush lies over the street that feels like breath being held. You approach slowly, noticing the way clusters of people gather in uneven pockets along the pavement. These are not mourners. They are not waiting for news. They are waiting for something else, an explanation, a confession, a face they can demand answers from. The fear that has been tightening its grip on the city now coils here, drawn to the hospital like iron to a magnet. It began with a single whisper spread at dawn. A body brought in during the night never came back out. By the time the sun rose, the rumour had grown legs. Some said the patient had still been alive when carried through the doors. Others swore they heard screams drifting from an upstairs window. Still others claimed the doctors were keeping bodies inside, piling them in dim rooms to experiment on. No one could say much with certainty, but certainty was no longer required, only suspicion. You stop near a cluster of neighbours shifting nervously in front of the wrought iron gate. Their voices are low, but the tension in their bodies speaks louder. One woman wrings her shawl between trembling hands as she tells the others that her brother was taken here last night. The attendants promised treatment. Instead, she says, they barred the door and pushed her back. No one has told her anything since. She points to a second-floor window and cries that she heard him shouting. The others murmur, and though none of them heard it themselves, her grief becomes their truth. A tall man with soot-streaked sleeves steps forward, his jaw clenched. He says he saw the physicians hauling crates into the building before dawn, crates too heavy to be equipment, crates long enough to hold bodies. His voice is steady, but his eyes flick toward the darkened entrance with dread. He claims the doctors are taking people who could still be saved, claims they are choosing who lives and who dies, claims they are hiding something behind these stone walls. No one challenges him. The tension swells as more people gather, milkmaids, labourers, mothers with children tugging at their skirts. Some carry lanterns, others carry sticks or stones tucked into pockets. Their anger trembles beneath the surface like a fever about to break. A constable stands near the gate, but he looks as uneasy as the crowd. His voice cracks as he tells them to disperse. No one moves. Then the door opens. A young doctor steps out, coat crisp, hair neatly parted. His hands tremble only slightly as he raises them in a gesture of calm. He begins to speak words about care, about protocols, about the challenges of treating so many at once. But the crowd hears something else. They hear avoidance. They hear excuses. They hear secrets, A woman shouts that her father was taken in last night and she wants to see him. No one answers her. A man demands to know how many bodies are inside. Another demands to know why the sick are kept behind locked doors. The doctor tries to speak again, but his voice is drowned like a match dropped into water. A stone hits the fence, small, almost accidental, but loud enough to stop every conversation. The doctor flinches. The crowd freezes. Then someone else steps forward, gripping the bars of the gate with white knuckles. "Let us in," he growls. The doctor hesitates. That single hesitation becomes fuel. More voices rise, shouting, pleading, accusing. The constable steps back now, overwhelmed. The doctor retreats, stumbling toward the doorway, as stones strike the gate harder, louder. The crowd surges, pressing forward, hands grabbing the rails, trying to force them open. Fear turns bodies into weapons. Inside the hospital, attendants rush to bar the doors. Outside, the mob roars, fueled by nights of unanswered questions, by the fear that their loved ones are being taken, hidden, dissected, disposed of. And as the first lantern smashes against the iron gate, spilling fire and glass across the stones, you feel the truth settle cold beneath your ribs. London is no longer afraid of the sickness. It is afraid of its healers. And this first crowd, is only the beginning. Morning drags itself slowly across Spitalfields, weak and colourless, as though the sun is too hesitant to fully rise over a city this frightened. You turn onto Blossom Street, just in time to see the produce carts lining up for market, their wheels groaning under the weight of wilted greens and yesterday's bruised apples. But the usual chatter is gone. The vendors speak in clipped murmurs, glancing often toward the alley behind the old brewery, toward the place where the doctor's coach was last seen. It should have returned hours ago. It never did. The first version of the story is simple. Sometime after midnight, a medical coach rattled down the street, lanterns swinging wildly, two men in long coats perched stiffly on the box. They were headed toward a house where a young woman had taken ill. Neighbors watched from their windows as the coach disappeared into the fog-drenched alley. The sound of hooves faded. Then, silence. But silence in Spitalfields is rarely innocent. By dawn, the rumour had grown teeth. A butcher swears he heard, shouting from the alley, muffled, frantic. A seamstress claims she saw figures moving between the shadows, their silhouettes too many for the two attendants who left in the coach. Someone else says the horses returned alone, reins trailing behind them like abandoned thread. You follow the direction of their stares. The alley yawns before you like a throat, narrow and damp, lined with brick walls sweating with condensation. Water drips from a gutter above, its rhythm unsettling in the morning quiet. At the far end, you find a patch of disturbed gravel, horseshoe prints leading in, none leading out. A woman stands nearby, wringing a cloth between trembling fingers. She says she heard the sick girl crying out just after the coach arrived, pleading, begging. Then, all at once, the cries stopped. When the neighbors tried to approach the house, the door slammed shut. The windows went dark, and the coach already gone never reappeared. "They took her," the woman whispers. "And God help us, I don't think she was dead." Several others gather around her, each adding a new layer to the story. Someone claims the doctors were seen loading something into the back of the coach, something wrapped in canvas, too light to be a body but too heavy to be tools. Another insists he saw a lantern signal from inside the alley, as if someone were communicating in secret. A stall-keeper takes it further still, saying a second coach waited deeper in the fog, ready to receive whatever cargo was being transferred. None of these details align perfectly, but fear binds them together into something that feels whole, something that feels true. A constable arrives, but even he keeps his distance, staring into the alley as though expecting it to swallow him too. He claims that the coach simply took another route back, that perhaps the driver stopped for supplies or was called to another emergency. No one believes him. The alley has become an abscess in the neighborhood, dark, unexplained, festering with unanswered questions. Every missing patient is now assumed to have traveled through these shadows. Every doctor seen hurrying under lamplight is imagined heading toward this vanishing place. You step deeper into the gloom, following the faint indentation of the wheels until they disappear altogether, consumed by the uneven stones. A scrap of cloth lies snagged on a splintered crate, pale as frost. It might mean nothing. It might mean everything. Behind you, the crowd watches with breathless expectation. They want you to find something that confirms their worst fears. They want the story to be real, because real enemies are easier to face than invisible ones. When you finally turn back toward the market, the whispers follow like a tide. The coach was taken. The doctors are hiding something. People are disappearing, and with every passing retelling, the path between fear and fury grows shorter, straight as an alley in the dawn fog, waiting for someone to follow it to its violent end. The sun hangs low over Whitechapel as you enter the narrow curve of Red Lion Court, its pale light filtering through a haze of chimney smoke and morning damp. The smell of raw meat clings thickly to the air here. Even the cobblestones beneath your feet seem stained by decades of blood, washed hurriedly into the gutters. It is a place where labor begins early, where knives flash before dawn and carcasses swing from hooks like silent pendulums. But today, the steady rhythm of the butcher stalls has faltered. Conversations die when you pass. Faces tighten. Eyes flick nervously toward one particular shop at the end of the lane. That is where the butcher stands broad-shouldered, apron streaked with yesterday's work, hands trembling ever so slightly as he folds and refolds a cloth. His name, according to the neighbors, is Mr. Harrow, a quiet man, reliable, the kind of butcher who knows every family by their Sunday cut. But this morning, he is not cutting meat. He is not greeting customers. He is leaning against his doorway, as if the bricks themselves are the only things holding him upright. The people nearby say he saw something he should not have seen, something no one was meant to witness. You approach slowly, and Mr. Harrow meets your gaze with the hollow look of someone who has slept little and remembered too much. He wipes his hands again nervously, unnecessarily, and gestures for you to follow him into the dim of his shop. The smell inside is overwhelming, but beneath it, beneath the lingering iron scent of the morning's slaughter, lies something else, something faint and chemical, like the sting of spirits used in medical rooms. He speaks only when he knows the door is shut. It was near midnight, he says. He was finishing his prep work, storing cuts of beef in the cold room, when he heard a wagon creak to a stop outside his shop. He assumed it was a fishmonger running late until he heard the voices. Low, sharp, the kind of tone used by men who do not want to be overheard. One voice he recognized, a local physician, a man Harrow trusted enough to stitch his hand once after a knife slipped. But the others? He had never heard them before. Their accents were clipped, not local. Their movements, heavy boots, hurried steps, did not match those of healers. Through a crack in the shutters, Harrow saw them haul something from the back of the wagon. A shape wrapped in canvas, human in size, human in form, but not still. The canvas twitched. Mr. Harrow's voice cracks at the memory. He gestures with his thick hands, showing how the bundle struggled, how the men tightened their grip and hissed for it to stop moving, how one of them struck the canvas with the flat of his hand, a blow meant to silence, how the doctor, his doctor, stood by, saying nothing. The butcher wanted to interrupt, wanted to shout, wanted to step into the street and demand answers. But then one of the men lifted the lantern, and Harrow saw the mark, some kind of symbol chalked onto the wagon's side. Not a hospital mark, not a parish sign, something else, something unfamiliar and yet purposeful in its simplicity. They dragged the canvas toward the back entrance of the hospital, the same entrance used for body deliveries, the same entrance no one ever watches closely. Harrow did not sleep the rest of the night. He thought he imagined it until this morning. when he heard that a young boy from Angel Yard had vanished. Feverish, they said, taken for treatment. Only the mother insists her son was still talking when they carried him away. Mr. Harrow steps closer to you, lowering his voice until it barely stirs the air. That bundle, he whispers, was alive. I swear it. Outside, a crowd begins to gather near the end of the lane. The butcher flinches. He knows what they want. They want details, accusation, confirmation. They want truth to justify the anger blooming like rot beneath the city's skin. And in this moment, Harrow becomes something he never intended to be. A witness, a spark, a man whose fear might ignite an entire neighborhood. You leave the shop slowly, feeling the weight of every word he spoke. People watch you, hoping for answers. Footsteps echo down the court as the rumor spreads like fire finding dry timber. The doctors are taking the living. The butcher saw them. The city must act. And overhead, the sun slips behind a cloud, leaving the lane in a dim, feverish half-light, as though London itself knows what comes next. The slope of Old Nichols Street dips gently as you follow it east, carrying you into one of the most crowded pockets of all East London. Houses lean shoulder to shoulder here, roofs sagging like they're tired of holding up a city that never truly rests. Laundry flaps limply on lines, strung between windows. A cat darts across the street, ribs visible beneath patchy fur, and beneath all of it, beneath the footsteps, beneath the mutters of early risers, another layer hangs thick in the air. A smell, sharp, bitter, wrong. At first you think it might be the usual mix of refuse and industry, a stew of rot, damp cloth, and coal smoke. But as you descend deeper into the lane, the odor intensifies. Acrid, chemical, like something meant for cleansing left too long in the open. People notice it too. You see it in the way they wrinkle their noses, glance toward the same row of houses, whisper behind their hands. Everyone knows where it's coming from. No one wants to say it aloud. You stop outside the apothecary, a narrow building wedged between two lodging houses, its peeling sign swaying slightly in the morning breeze. The shutters are closed, too tightly closed. Even the cracks between them seem stuffed with cloth. And yet the smell leaks out, curling through the street like a warning. A cluster of neighbors stands near the doorway, speaking with the anxious rhythm of those afraid to admit what they suspect. A woman holding a basket swears she saw smoke rising from the cellar vent last night, blue-tinted smoke that shimmered in the lamplight. A man beside her nods vigorously, adding that he heard clattering, like metal bowls striking stone. Another insists he heard voices, muffled but frantic, rising beneath the floorboards. But what draws your eye is the vent itself. You kneel beside it, as the smell hits stronger, biting the back of your throat, burning faintly in your nose. Someone grabs your shoulder, urging you back, warning you not to breathe too deeply. They say it's poison. They say the doctors brought barrels of the stuff under cover of darkness 2 nights ago. They say the apothecary has been mixing it, perfecting it, preparing it. Preparing it for what? You stand slowly, noticing the scrape marks on the cobblestones, marks from barrels being rolled toward the cellar door. Fresh, recent, too clean-cut to be accidental. The people around you grow restless, their fear thickening into something more dangerous. A young man with soot on his face tries the apothecary door. Locked. He bangs. No answer. The sound echoes through the street like a warning bell. Someone mutters that the apothecary was seen speaking with physicians. Another says he's been paid off to experiment on the sick. A third swears she heard crying through the floorboards, crying. She repeats, pressing a hand to her chest as though steadying her own heart. The crowd grows. Footsteps multiply. You can feel the shift, subtle at first, then unmistakable as curiosity curdles into anger. A man picks up a stone, weighing it in his palm. Another steps closer to the shuttered windows, peering through a gap just wide enough for a sliver of darkness. From within the cellar, something clatters. The sound freezes the street. A drop, a scrape, a low, hollow thud. Someone gasps, someone else backs away, but many step forward because the unknown is worse than anything their imaginations have already conjured. Then the smell thickens so potent it stings the eyes. A woman coughs violently. The young man with the soot-covered face spits into the gutter, swearing that whatever is in that cellar is not medicine, not healing, not meant for saving anyone. You feel the streets swell around you, fear expanding like a lung ready to scream. People push closer to the apothecary door. Fingers curl around stones, sticks, anything that feels like a weapon. Someone shouts to break the shutters. Someone else argues they should drag the apothecary out and demand answers. And in the rising heat of that panic, you realize something terrible. It no longer matters what is truly in that cellar. It no longer matters who is innocent. The city has already decided. The smell drifting from beneath the floorboards has become a symbol proof, fuel, justification, and as the sun climbs higher, casting harsh light across Old Nickel Street, the tension finally snaps. The first fist strikes the shutter, then another. Then the pounding begins steady, furious, unstoppable. London has reached a point of no return, and this cellar, this smell, is the spark that will force the city to choose between its healers and its fears. And fear is winning. The sun has barely slipped behind the chimneys when you reach the crooked bend of Three Foxes Lane, where the old alehouse crouches between two leaning boarding houses. Its sign, a faded trio of foxes dancing in a ring, creaks in the wind, though the air tonight is too still for anything to sway naturally. A soft glow spills from the windows, but the usual laughter, the clatter of mugs, the raucous voices of men escaping a long day, none of it is there. Instead, you hear only murmurs, low, urgent, heavy with the weight of something about to break. Inside, the alehouse feels smaller than it should. Smoke curls thickly above the tables, and every seat is taken. Men press shoulder to shoulder, eyes darting toward the door each time it opens. Women stand near the walls, shawls wrapped tightly around their arms. No one orders a drink. The barkeep watches anxiously, wiping the same spot on the counter over and over, as though polishing wood will keep the night from unraveling. A hush ripples through the room as you step in, not because you are recognized, but because everyone is watching everyone else. At the largest table near the hearth, a group of men sits hunched forward, their faces lit by the trembling fire. You recognize some of them: laborers, carters, bricklayers, the sort who are usually loud, boisterous, unafraid of anything except an empty purse. But tonight, their fear is different, more intimate, more dangerous. A man with a scar across his cheek stands first. His voice is raw, worn down by shouting or grief, or both. "They're taking people," he begins, marking them, dragging them from their beds. That smell in Old Nickel, those bells in Shoreditch, they ain't accidents, they're signs. A murmur of agreement swells through the alehouse. Faces tighten. Fingers tap anxiously on tabletops. Another man rises thin, restless, his hands shaking as he grips the edge of the table. He tells them about the cellar in the apothecary, the barrels, the smoke. He swears he saw figures hauling sacks late into the night, their faces hidden, their steps hurried. He repeats the same phrase over and over, as if by saying it enough times it will become absolute truth. They ain't treating the sick, they're taking 'em. The room grows warmer, crowded with breath and fear. A woman near the door speaks next, recounting how her daughter vanished from the hospital alive when she entered, silent ever since. She chokes on her words, and someone places a hand on her shoulder. Her grief is enough to ignite the room. Then Mr. Harrow, the butcher, steps into the center. The room stills as though London itself holds its breath. He repeats the story he told you: the bundle in the wagon, the struggling shape, the doctor who looked away. But here, in the alehouse, his words carry new weight. They echo off the walls, off the rafters, off the bones of every frightened soul present. "They ain't afraid of the sick," he finishes quietly. "They're afraid of us. The alehouse erupts not in drunken cheer, but in frantic voices rising and overlapping. Some demand action, others shout that the doctors must be confronted. Someone suggests surrounding the hospital, forcing entry. A few talk of seizing the apothecary, dragging him out until he explains himself. The more level-headed try to calm the room, but their words drown under the swell of rage and certainty. Fear is no longer an emotion. It is a plan. A man slams his fist onto the table, sending mugs rattling to the floor. If they'll not tell us the truth, we'll take it ourselves. The cheer that follows is not loud, but it is unanimous, quiet, fierce, and final. The barkeep warns them to be careful, that violence will bring constables, that the city will punish them. But no one listens. The crowd has passed the point of reason. Their fear has fermented into something stronger, something blinding. Someone bars the alehouse door, not to keep danger out, but to keep resolve in. Maps of the neighborhood are spread across the tables. Routes are marked, groups are chosen, torches promised. And as you stand among them, watching their dread solidify into determination, you realize the truth. This isn't a meeting, it's a beginning, a seed of fury planted in the heart of London, ready to burst into flame the moment the next scream carries through the narrow streets. And that scream, you know it, is coming soon. The fog drifts low across Bethnal Green when you arrive, curling like pale fingers around the lampposts and pooling in the dips of the street. The houses here are small, thin-walled, their bricks constantly damp no matter the season. You can hear the hum of whispered conversation seeping through cracks in the shutters, the sound of fear woven into every syllable. Tonight, one story threads through them all. A woman kept her husband hidden from the doctors. You follow the murmurs toward a narrow court at the end of a crooked lane. Laundry hangs limp overhead, though no breeze stirs it. At the far side of the court stands a modest house, barely wider than its own door. Its windows are shuttered, its curtains tightly drawn. A single candle flickers somewhere inside, its glow faint beneath the gaps in the frame. Neighbors hover nearby, not close enough to intrude, but not far enough to ignore. Their faces carry the mixed expressions of sympathy and suspicion. Everyone knows what happened inside that house last night, though no one can agree on what part of it was truth and what part fear has twisted. The woman, Mrs. Brunton, had kept her husband's illness secret for nearly 2 days. She told the neighbors he had gone to stay with a cousin in Hoxton. She laughed when people asked after him, though her laugh trembled at the edges. She emptied chamber pots at night, quietly enough that no one heard. She washed linens behind the house and hung them inside instead of in the court. She whispered prayers through the cracks in her hands. But sickness has a smell, and fear has sharper senses than any doctor. It was the milkmaid who finally noticed something was wrong the way Mrs. Branton cupped her hand around a tremor in her voice, the shadow of panic each time someone mentioned the hospital on Bishopsgate. By evening, whispers spread through the court like rising smoke. Someone had fallen ill. Someone was being hidden. When the knock came at midnight, it wasn't the neighbors, it was the doctors. Torches burned outside the Branton house as 2 men in black coats approached the door. Their voices were calm, too calm, as they announced themselves. They said they only wished to help. They said delays were dangerous. They said Mrs. Branton must let them inside. But she didn't. Through the thin walls of the court, neighbors heard her voice sharp, cracking with desperation, pleading for them to leave, insisting her husband only needed rest, begging them not to take him. Shouts followed. A crash. A scrape of furniture dragged against a door. The candle inside flickered wildly, shadows staggering across the shutters like frantic hands. And then, silence. You reach the doorstep now, feeling the cold seep up from the stones. Neighbors say the doctors left after several minutes, muttering to each other as they disappeared down the lane. They didn't force the door, not yet, but they promised they would return by dawn. Inside the house, a soft sound stirs. A cough, wet, shallow, aching. The kind of cough that marks the border between fever and something far worse. Mrs. Branton moves between rooms, whispering to her husband, trying to soothe a man whose breath is failing. Each whisper carries out into the court like a frayed thread. You step back, watching the door. The neighbors watch too. Some pity her, some fear her. One man insists she is selfish for hiding the sickness, putting them all in danger. A woman argues that she is right to hide him. The doctors cannot be trusted. Not after the bells, not after the cellar, not after the missing children. Truth and fear mingle until they are indistinguishable. Behind the shutters, Mrs. Brunton cries softly, rocking back and forth as she holds her husband's hand. She knows dawn is nearing. She knows the doctors will return. She knows the neighbors will not stand with her, not when their own lives hang in the balance. She clings to him anyway, and as the first faint glow of morning touches the edge of the court, you realize the truth. This house will not remain quiet for long, not with sickness inside, not with doctors outside, not with a city on the brink of choosing violence over mercy. Bethnal Green is holding its breath. When it exhales, another riot will begin. Dawn has barely scraped its pale fingers across the rooftops when you turn into Old Nickel Street again. But the quiet that usually blankets the early hours is gone, ripped apart, replaced by a raw tension vibrating through every brick, every shutter, every breath. The smell from the apothecary's cellar still lingers in the air, faint but unmistakable, like a ghost clinging to the stones. And now, that smell has become something far more dangerous, a rallying cry. People gather in small clusters along the street, men with soot-stained sleeves, women clutching shawls tight against trembling shoulders, boys who should still be asleep peering from behind their mothers' skirts. Their voices overlap in frantic murmurs. Something happened during the night. Something pushed the neighborhood past its breaking point. You move toward the apothecary's door, where the boards are splintered at the edges. Someone tried to break them. Someone succeeded. A man with red-rimmed eyes steps forward, pointing to the damage. He says a group came in the darkest hour, neighbors who met at the alehouse, men whose fear had finally overpowered their restraint. They marched to the apothecary with torches in hand, shouting that they would drag the truth from him, that they would see what he hid beneath the floorboards. When the apothecary refused to open his door, they used a length of iron pipe to strike the shutters, blow after blow, until the boards cracked like bones. Someone threw a lantern at the window, and though the glass didn't break, the clang echoed through the houses like a bell summoning London to wake. You can see the marks, the soot smudged along the sill, the broken wood strewn across the ground. The door hangs crooked, barely clinging to its hinges. He wasn't inside, the man whispers. He ran before they got here, but the crowd didn't know that at first. And fear untethered, unquestioned, needs only a target. A woman with a trembling voice says they stormed inside, men and women shoulder to shoulder, pushing through the narrow shop into the cellar door. Someone kicked it open. The smell, sharp, metallic, stinging, burst into the air like a struck match. It coated their tongues, their throats. Some coughed, others shielded their faces with their sleeves, and then they saw them. Barrels, broken crates, pails streaked with residue, too pale to be blood, too dark to be milk. A table cluttered with bottles and tools, the kind used by physicians, not apothecaries. And on the floor, scattered like discarded thoughts, were pages of notes soaked through with spilled chemicals. No bodies, no corpses. But no one needed bodies to believe what they already feared. Someone screamed that the apothecary was making poison. Someone else shouted that he was helping the doctors choose victims. A boy cried that he heard crying from the cellar just 2 nights ago. Truth drowned beneath panic. Logic suffocated under suspicion. In the chaos, someone knocked over a lantern. The flame rolled across the floor, catching on cloth and wood. Men scrambled to stomp it out, but a spark slipped through the cracks, lighting the edge of a hanging sack. Smoke rose, panic swelled. The crowd surged out of the shop, dragging the chaos with them. By sunrise, the apothecary had fled, leaving the street to sort through the wreckage of its own terror. The cellar still smoulders faintly, a thin trickle of smoke escaping through the open door. Whatever truth once lived down there has burned into ash. Now the crowd stands united, not in discovery, but in certainty. If the apothecary was guilty, the doctors must be worse. If the cellar held secrets, the hospitals must hold horrors. If one man could betray a neighborhood, others surely already have. You look at the faces around you, uncertain, angry, exhausted, and realize that old Nickel Street has passed a threshold. The riot last night was not an end, it was a beginning. London has learned how to fight back, and it will not stop at a single door. Far down the street, another group forms, speaking urgently, gesturing toward Bishopsgate, toward the hospital, toward the doctors. The next riot is already gathering its breath. The cold morning light has a brittle edge as it breaks over Bethnal Green, glinting off the puddles gathered in the uneven stones between the tenements. You follow a hush that feels heavier than silence, the stunned quiet that settles after something terrible has happened. The neighborhood seems to recoil as you pass, as though the walls themselves witnessed more than they can bear to remember. At the center of Weaver's Court, a cramped patch of earth ringed by leaning houses whose windows stare down like grim witnesses, stands a circle of disturbed dirt. Footprints, drag marks, a scrap of white cloth trampled into the mud, and a faint stain near the wall that the neighbors point to with trembling hands, afraid even to say the word blood. This is where the nurse was dragged. You ask quietly, and they answer quietly, their voices thick with shame and fear. Everyone here knows her face. She was not a wealthy woman, nor a powerful one, just a nurse from the infirmary, who came each morning with a basket of linen and gentle words for the sick. They say she always smiled, always poured water from the pump for the elderly, always pressed copper coins into the hands of shivering children. But last night, none of that mattered. A man with soot still smeared across his forehead steps forward, recounting the story with a voice that shakes despite his efforts to still it. He and others saw her walking home after her evening shift, her posture weary, her eyes heavy with the sorrow of so many dying around her. She carried no medicine bag, only her shawl and a tin cup. She was halfway across Weaver's Court when the shouting began. They thought she was marking houses, the man says, swallowing hard. Thought she was part of it. The rumor had spread so easily, nurses helping doctors select victims, nurses carrying the smell of the cellar on their clothes, nurses whispering into windows before the sickness struck. Fear warped her profession into conspiracy, her compassion into threat. A group emerged from the shadows, men who had drunk enough courage to harden their trembling hands. Women fueled by grief so raw it burned. Someone pointed at the nurse's sleeve, claiming he saw a mark. Someone else shouted that her apron carried stains that weren't from work. The accusations drowned reason in seconds. When she tried to explain, they did not listen. When she stepped back, they stepped forward. And when she turned to flee, hands reached for her. A woman nearby breaks into sobs as she recalls the nurse's scream, thin, desperate, cut short as she was seized by the arms. They dragged her toward the wall, demanding answers she couldn't give. They shook her until her cap fell, until her shawl tore, until the fear in her eyes became something they no longer recognized as human. She kept saying the same thing. The sobbing woman whispers, "I only came to help. I only came to help." Some in the crowd hesitated. One man tried to pull the others away. But fear makes allies of the angriest, not the kindest. A stone was thrown. Then another. Someone spit at her feet. Someone shouted to bring her confession out of her confession of what no one could say. The nurse collapsed to her knees, and still they loomed over her, shadows taller than any truth. It might have ended far worse if not for the arrival of the widow from the next building. A quiet woman, always unseen, always grieving. She pushed through the crowd and knelt beside the nurse, shielding her with shaking arms. No courage, no strength, just a mother's instinct to protect suffering wherever she saw it. That pause, that single fragile gesture, was enough to break the fever of the mob. They fell back, murmuring, some muttering excuses, others staring at their hands as if seeing them for the first time. Shame cooled what anger had ignited, but the damage had already been done. The nurse was carried away by two neighbors, limp, bruised, barely conscious. The court remained stained and silent, as though the earth itself were ashamed of what it had witnessed. And the next morning brought no apology. Only fear turned inward, fear of what they had done, fear of what they might do again, fear of what would happen when the next rumor fell like a spark into their powder-dry dread. As you stand in Weaver's Court, the wind lifts the scrap of white cloth from the mud, fluttering it weakly before dropping it again. A reminder, London no longer sees healers, it sees suspects, it sees threats, it sees enemies in aprons and conspiracies in kindness. And beyond the court, you can already hear new shouts, new accusations forming like storm clouds. The city is unraveling, thread by trembling thread, and no one, not even those who came only to help, is safe from its fear. The morning begins with wheels, wooden wheels, grinding against stone far earlier than they should. You hear them before you see them, turning slowly down the narrow bends of Whitechapel High Street, their groan echoing like a warning bell. It is still dim, the sun not yet strong enough to burn away the mist, but that sound pulls people from their beds, from their doorways, from the fragile safety of their whispers. They gather at the windows, lifting their curtains with trembling fingers. The dead carts have come early, too early. You walk toward the sound, each turn revealing more uneasy faces, more questions hidden behind clenched jaws. The first cart appears a hulking shape drawn by a tired horse, its coat mottled with sweat and grime. The driver sits hunched at the front, shoulders stiff, eyes fixed forward. But it's not the cart, nor the driver, nor the horse that draws the stairs. It is the cloth tied to the side, a blue flag. It flaps weakly in the breeze, its color too vivid against the drab grey of the cart. A blue flag means cholera. A blue flag means danger. A blue flag means the bodies inside carry a threat that clings to their skin, their clothes, their breath. Everyone knows the meaning. Everyone has seen it used before. But never this early. Never this many. Another cart follows the first, then a third, each marked by the same fluttering blue strip. The carts always came later, after noon, usually when the attendants could collect their grim cargo with some semblance of order. But now, they arrive at dawn, trundling into the streets before even the market stalls have opened. People lean from their windows. People whisper. People step back. Someone mutters that the sickness must be spreading faster. Someone else says that bodies are filling the infirmary too quickly to store. A third swears that the doctors are ordering early collections to hide how many are dying within their walls. You move closer to the carts. The air shifts, heavy with lime and the faint sting of bleach, the scent that clings to the attendants' clothes. The men walking beside the carts wear scarves tied across their mouths, their eyes hollow, refusing to meet the stares of the growing crowd. They hold long poles tipped with hooks, meant to lift bodies without allowing contact. One of the attendants slips, catching himself against the cart, and for a brief moment, the tarpaulin covering the bodies shifts. A small pale foot appears beneath the edge, before the man hastily covers it again. A gasp ripples through the crowd, not because of the foot, but because of the size. A child. Someone screams. Others clutch their mouths. The street quakes with the tremor that always follows grief recognized too late. A woman pushes forward, demanding to know whose child it is. No one answers. The attendants are not allowed to speak. Another voice shouts that the doctors are taking the sick too soon, that the boy might have still been breathing when they came. Someone argues they saw a child taken away alive the night before. The rumors blister and boil, surging through the street. The attendants try to move on, but the crowd blocks their path. Faces contort fear becoming anger, grief becoming blame. People shout for the tarpaulin to be lifted, for the attendants to show the bodies, to prove they are dead before being hauled away like refuse. One of the attendants snaps, shouting back that they are doing what must be done, that the disease spreads faster than the grieving can. His voice cracks with exhaustion, but that single spark of defensiveness ignites something volatile. A stone flies from the crowd, striking the wheel. Another strikes the side of the cart. The attendants flinch, backing away. Someone grabs the blue flag and rips it off, waving it like a banner of accusation. "They're taking our people," a man shouts. "Alive or dead, they take them." The street erupts into chaos. The carts lurch forward, attendants trying desperately to escape the tightening circle of bodies, the swelling roar of outrage. Women scream, children cry. Men shove and spit and shake their fists at the men who have become symbols of everything London now fears: death, secrecy, medicine. By the time the carts break free and rattle down the street, leaving the crowd gasping and wild behind them, the ground is littered with stones and torn cloth shreds of blue flags trampled underfoot. And as the carts disappear into the mist, one truth settles over the street like a new layer of fog. London no longer sees dead carts. It sees kidnapping wagons. It sees conspiracies on wheels. And the next time those blue flags appear, the crowd may not let them pass at all. Night has a way of sinking deeper in Smithfield than anywhere else in London. The streets around St. Bartholomew's Hospital seem to absorb darkness rather than reflect it, as though the stones themselves are tired of witnessing suffering and have chosen to hide under a heavier shade of black. You approach slowly, feeling the cold gather in the narrow corridor of air between the looming hospital walls and the crooked houses opposite. Even before you turn the final corner, you see the glow. Lanterns, dozens of them, their trembling amber light spills across the cobblestones, casting long, frantic shadows of the crowd gathered at the hospital gate. Men, women, even children, faces pinched, shoulders hunched, breathing quick and shallow, cluster together as if the heat of their fear alone keeps the darkness from swallowing them whole. The lamps they hold sputter in the chill air, their flames licking the glass with a feverish urgency. You join the edge of the gathering and hear the whispers that ripple like cold wind through the crowd. They say someone heard screams from a window on the south wing. They say a body was lowered in the middle of the night. They say doctors have begun to work behind locked doors instead of in open wards. They say the blue flags on the carts matched the cloth tied on a physician's carriage that left this very gate before dawn. None of these whispers have proof. All of them have weight. A man standing near the front clenches his lantern with white-knuckled hands. He's a cooper from the lane behind the church, and his wife was brought here 2 nights ago, trembling, dehydrated, gasping for breath. He demanded to stay beside her, but the attendants pushed him out. They promised they would summon him if her condition worsened. They never did. He hasn't seen her since. On his other side stands a mother clutching a child so tightly the girl's face is buried against her chest. The mother's eyes are wild, watching every shadow that moves behind the hospital windows. She swears she saw a doctor carry a bundle through a side door an hour earlier. Too small to be a man, too large to be tools. She cried out, but the doctor didn't turn back. Lanterns swing higher as more people arrive. The glow thickens, brightening the stone facade of the hospital until it reveals how many windows have been shuttered from the inside. Once, the wards were always open, light spilling outward, nurses moving freely, physicians calling for water, cloth, air. Now the glass reflects only darkness. Someone rattles the gate. Metal clatters against metal. A murmur passes through the crowd like a rising tide. You see a physician approach slowly from the courtyard, coat buttoned high, hair dishevelled, face pale in the lantern glow. He raises his hands to calm them, but his voice trembles. He speaks of overcrowding, of fear, of doing all they can. He insists the rumours are false, but when he steps forward, the lanterns lift instinctively, shining directly into his face. And the crowd sees it, the exhaustion etched deep beneath his eyes, the small smear of something pale at his cuff, the way his breath catches before he speaks again. None of it is damning. All of it is enough. A man steps forward and demands the cooper's wife be shown. Another demands the children's ward be opened. A third wants to know what happened to the patients from Bleeding Heart Yard. Voices rise, shaking with grief and fury, forming a jagged chorus that presses against the physician like a physical force. He stammers that he cannot open the gates. He cannot let them inside. It isn't safe. It is the wrong answer. A lantern slams against the bars. Glass shatters. Flames burst across the front of the gate before sputtering out on the cold metal. The crowd surges forward. The physician recoils, stumbling backward into the courtyard. Someone shouts to tear the door from its hinges. Someone else screams that their loved ones are being murdered inside. A child begins to cry, but the sound is swallowed by the roar rising from the crowd. You feel the shift, the moment fear transforms into certainty, and certainty into violence. There is no turning back now. Not for this crowd, not for this street, not for this city. The gates rattle harder. Lantern flames whip in the wind. The hospital windows stare down like dark, watching eyes. And as the first hinge begins to groan under the strain, you understand the terrible truth. This is no longer a protest. This is an invasion waiting to ignite. And inside St. Bartholomew's, the doctors can hear every heartbeat of the mob gathering to tear their world apart. The first light of morning crawls over Bishopsgate like a wounded thing, weak and colourless, barely touching the rooftops, before sinking into the grime that coats the street. You walk toward the row of shuttered shops where the apothecary once worked, though worked no longer feels like the right word. People used to line this street at dawn, mothers buying tonics for their feverish children, dock workers collecting poultices for sore joints, but today, no one queues, no one knocks, no one even walks too close, because the door of the apothecary's shop is no longer a door at all. It has been shattered, split down the middle, splintered into jagged pieces that jut outward like broken ribs. Fragments of wood scatter across the cobblestones. The sign above it hangs crooked, one chain snapped, as though trying to turn away from what happened beneath it. You draw nearer, hearing the low hum of voices. A small crowd has gathered, each person speaking in strained whispers, as though the morning itself might shatter if they raise their voices too loudly. An old man with trembling hands pokes at the broken remains of the doorframe with his cane, then recoils as though expecting it to bite. They came before sunrise. A young woman murmurs, arms folded tightly across her chest. A whole crowd of them, torches, sticks, whatever they could grab. They meant to drag him out into the street, but he wasn't there. Not anymore. The apothecary, the man who had lived above his shop for nearly 15 years, had vanished sometime in the night. Some swear he fled toward the river. Others claim they saw him running down Houndsditch, coat flapping wildly behind him. One woman insists he left hours before the crowd arrived, slipping away with only a satchel and a bottle of something dark. The stories shift like fog, but everyone agrees on one thing. He knew the crowd was coming. You step inside the splintered threshold. The shop is a ruin. Glass bottles shattered across the floor, their contents pooling into sticky, discoloured puddles. Herbs trampled underfoot. Shelves tipped onto their sides. A mortar cracked in half. The air stings your nostrils with the sharp tang of spilled chemicals, mixed with something more subtle, fear, perhaps, or the ghost of it. You make your way carefully toward the back corner, where the cellar door stands wide open. The crowd behind you leans forward, stretching their necks to peer inside. Everything below has been gutted, barrels overturned, cloth sacks torn and emptied, papers ripped from their bindings and scattered like autumn leaves across the stone steps, a table overturned, a lamp smashed. The remnants of last night's riot lie heavy in the air, thick with the dust of broken trust. A boy at your elbow whispers that they expected to find bodies, that the apothecary had been hiding them in the dark, preserving them for the doctors. He says the men who broke in swore they smelled death the moment the door cracked open. But the cellar, for all its ruin, holds no bodies, no corpses, nothing but chaos. Which means one of two things. Either the apothecary was innocent, or he was clever enough to hide the truth somewhere else. A woman kneels beside a torn page lying at her feet. She picks it up gingerly, reading the words aloud through trembling lips. Symptoms present within hours. Spasms, bluing at the extremities. Her voice falters. Suddenly the crowd surges closer, as though the ink itself carries meaning they've been desperate to find. Men snatch pages from the floor, holding them to the light, searching for proof of guilt, of conspiracy, of anything that might confirm the fear twisting their stomachs. Someone shouts that the notes are experiments. Someone else claims they're instructions for poisoning. A third whispers that they are evidence of doctors using the apothecary as an accomplice. Theories bloom like rot, each one more grotesque than the last. By the time the constables arrive, the crowd is no longer simply curious. It is hungry for someone to blame, for someone to fear, for someone to punish. The broken door becomes a monument to that hunger, a warning to anyone who might be next. You step back into the street, watching as the morning brightens enough to reveal the frightened faces of the neighborhood. The apothecary is gone, the cellar is empty, but the anger left in his wake is not. It spreads quickly, from one doorway to the next, from one street to another, seeping into the cracks of London like water searching for the easiest path downhill. And now, with the apothecary vanished and the hospital surrounded by lantern-bearing crowds, you feel it in your bones. The riots have stopped being rumors. They have begun to take shape. They have found their targets, and the city's fear, no longer contained behind splintered doors, is ready to erupt into open violence. The rooftops of Clerkenwell have always held their own quiet world, chimneys clustered like crooked teeth, slates slick with soot, narrow ridges where only the bravest children dared to balance. But tonight, as you step into the dim alley below, that world is no longer quiet. It trembles with hurried footsteps, scattering pigeons into the smoky dawn. It echoes with shouts rising from the streets, shouts that are no longer warnings, but hunting calls. A doctor is running. You hear him before you see him. The scrape of boots along tile, the thud of a body rolling across a gable, the sharp exhale of a man who knows he cannot stop. When he appears above you, silhouetted against a bruised sky, he looks less like a physician and more like a fugitive. His coat flaps behind him in torn strips, snagged on gutters and chimney pots. His bag, a symbol once of comfort, is gone. He abandoned it somewhere below, dropped into the chaos like a useless relic. And below, the crowd gathers. They spill from every corner of the street, dock workers still in their nightshirts, women shouting through cracked voices, boys carrying sticks. Their torches sputter wildly, casting jagged beams of light against the walls as they pace along the alley, following the doctor's path with grim determination. Some shout accusations, some call his name, some call him murderer. All demand he come down. The doctor, sweat streaking soot across his face, does not answer. Instead, he climbs higher. You follow the alley, watching as he leaps from roof to roof with the desperate grace of a man whose life depends on every step. His breath comes in sharp bursts. His hands shake as he grabs the lip of a window ledge. His boots skid dangerously across tiles slick with river mist. He is not used to this terrain. His knowledge lies in anatomy, not rooftops. A voice rises above the others, a woman's voice, raw with grief. "You took him. You took my boy." The doctor freezes, just long enough for the crowd to surge. A stone flies upward, clattering against the chimney near his head. He flinches, nearly losing his grip. Another stone strikes his shoulder. He grunts in pain and stumbles forward, landing hard on a slanted slope of slate that groans beneath his weight. You can see panic building behind his eyes as he looks across the rooftops and realizes there is no escape in that direction. The next house is taller, the gap between them too wide. He turns back toward the crowd gathering below, toward the alley narrowing with bodies, their fists raised, their voices rising as one tide. Someone brings a ladder, someone else brings rope. What began as pursuit is now siege. The doctor scrambles sideways along a narrow ridge, boots sliding dangerously. He tries to shout something, an explanation, perhaps, or a plea, but his voice cracks beneath the noise swelling from below. They cannot hear him. They will not hear him. Their grief has calcified into certainty, and in certainty there is no room for truth. A young boy climbs onto a ledge nearby, pointing up at the doctor with wild, triumphant eyes. There! Don't let him go. He was at the apothecary. He was with the wagons. Truth or rumor no longer matters. The crowd erupts into motion. Several men begin to climb the ladder propped against a drain pipe. Others toss ropes upward, trying to snare the doctor's ankles. The physician stumbles again, kneeling on the roof ridge, fingers digging into the slate, as though he could anchor himself to the city he once served. Then, in a moment that will burn into memory long after the riots fade, he makes a decision. He rises slowly, steadiness returning to his limbs, not the steadiness of a man triumphing over danger, but of someone surrendering to it. With a final glance across the rooftops, he swings himself toward the neighboring house, a gap far too wide, a leap far too desperate. You know before he jumps that he will not make it. He knows it too. His body arcs for an instant against the pale morning light, suspended between earth and sky, between healer and hunted. Then gravity claims him, pulling him down into the narrow passage between the houses. The crowd falls silent. No cheers, no triumph. Only the sound of one final impact echoing through the alley like a closing door. And as the light strengthens over Clerkenwell, you realize London has crossed another threshold. If a doctor cannot outrun the fear below him even on the rooftops, then the city's rage has only begun to show its teeth. Morning creeps into Bunhill Fields with a strange, subdued quiet, as if even the birds have chosen not to sing. You walk through the crooked gate, its iron bars cold beneath your fingertips, and at once the air changes. It is heavier here, thicker, saturated with damp earth and something else, an unease that clings to your coat like mist. The burial ground stretches before you in uneven rows, gravestones tilting at weary angles, each one marked with names softened by rain and time. This place was always crowded. London's dead have long outnumbered its living, but never like this. Never with the urgency you see now. Never with the hurried mounds of freshly turned soil rising like blisters across the grounds. The first thing you notice is the smell. Not the sharp stench of rot, though traces linger, but the sourness of lime, thrown hastily onto bodies buried too quickly to be mourned. It hangs in the air like a warning, sharp enough to sting your eyes. A group of gravediggers stands near the far wall, their shovels resting against a pile of earth far larger than it should be. Their coats are stained, their faces pale, their hands shaking from more than cold. You approach them slowly, and one of them, a broad man with hollow cheeks, meets your gaze with a haunted look. "There's no more room," he says quietly. "No more earth left to take them." He gestures toward the newest graves, too shallow, barely covered. As you draw closer, your boots sink into soft soil, the ground shifting beneath you with a disturbing give. A boy nearby swears he saw fingers poking through a mound earlier, pale against the dirt, before a gravedigger hastily shoveled more earth on top. The boy's mother hushes him, but her eyes dart nervously to the mound nonetheless. People begin to gather at the edges of the burial ground, fathers with hats in their hands, mothers clutching rosaries, children staring wide-eyed at graves that look like they were dug in panic rather than reverence. Some whisper prayers, others simply stare, numb with exhaustion. Then the real murmurs begin. A woman whispers that her husband's grave was supposed to be deeper. She insists she paid for it. But when she pressed her ear to the earth earlier, she claims she could hear water beneath. Contaminated water. Water from the same source that killed him. Another woman says she saw doctors here at dawn, not to bury, but to inspect. She swears she heard them taking notes, pointing to bodies with gloved hands. Why? She asks, no one in particular. Why would doctors examine the dead before the gravediggers even got here? A man answers sharply, because they're looking for something they ain't telling us. You move toward a grave that has sunk in the middle, the soil collapsing into the hollow beneath. Someone mutters that the sickness is in the ground now, seeping through the cemetery, poisoning the soil. Someone else argues that the bodies are rising because they're not truly dead, and though none of it is rational, none of it feels entirely impossible to the people standing here. Fear makes every shadow sharper, every sinking grate more sinister, every mound of earth a threat. A constable arrives, trying to carve order from the growing unrest. He insists the burial ground is simply overcrowded, that no foul play is involved. But his voice lacks conviction, and the crowd senses it. They begin to press closer, demanding answers, demanding to see the burial records, demanding to know why the graves are so shallow and why the bodies are buried before sunrise. One of the gravediggers loses his temper, shouting that they don't have time to dig deeper, that if they don't bury the dead quickly, the disease will spread faster. But the crowd hears only one thing: the doctors are rushing the burials. The dead are disappearing. Something is being hidden. And beneath your feet, the soil shifts again, too loose, too thin, proving to everyone that something here is terribly, unforgivably wrong. A woman screams as the ground near her collapses inward, revealing a patch of cloth. Someone pulls her back. The crowd recoils. Gasps fill the air, then anger, then questions, then accusations. And in the rising heat of panic, you feel the final truth settle like a stone in your gut. The burial ground is overflowing, not only with bodies, but with fear. And once the dead begin to rise in rumor, the living will soon rise in riot. The bells of the Guildhall strike noon as you make your way toward the square, their tones dull and uneven, as if the metal itself is weary from carrying the weight of the city's fear. London has always swarmed at midday, carts rattling, hawkers shouting, horses snorting, clouds of warm breath into the cold air, but today everything feels muted. Movement slows, voices drop, people gather not for trade, but for answers, and at the center of it all, standing atop the steps of the Guildhall, is the mayor. His coat is immaculate, though his face betrays a sleepless night, pale, tight around the mouth, eyes shadowed. He grips the railing as though the stone beneath him might crumble. Behind him, two aldermen shift anxiously, exchanging quiet glances as the crowd pushes closer, lanterns raised even in daylight, their wicks flickering in the chill wind. He came to speak, but the crowd did not come to listen. They came to demand. The first murmur rises from a cluster near the steps, angry voices questioning the overflowing burial grounds, the vanished apothecary, the blue flags on the carts. Someone shouts that doctors are fleeing. Someone else yells that the hospitals have locked their doors. A woman holds up a scrap of fabric the same color as the flags, marking the dead carts, and shakes it violently at the mayor. "Tell us why," she cries, her voice sharp enough to cut through the air. "Tell us what they're doing to us." The mayor clears his throat and raises his hands for silence, but the gesture is swallowed by the raw building from below. Still, he begins softly at first. He speaks of sanitation, of necessary precautions, of the need for calm, of rumors grown too wild for the city to endure. He speaks like a man standing on a ship already sinking, but every word he utters drifts upward like smoke, easy to see, easier to disperse. A butcher near you shouts that his neighbor's body disappeared before burial. A dock worker accuses the mayor of hiding the death counts. A mother raises a trembling hand and screams that her daughter was taken to the hospital alive and has not been seen since. Each accusation cracks the mayor's composure, splintering his calm veneer like thin ice. The crowd swells. Lanterns clatter against each other. Boots scrape forward. Fear begins to pulse like a second heartbeat through the square. You watch the mayor's face as he tries again, harder, louder. He insists the doctors are doing everything they can. He insists there is no conspiracy, no secret burials, no experiments. He insists the city must trust its healers. But he speaks from the steps distance between him and the people while they speak from grief. And grief speaks louder. A stone hits the step below him, cracking against the edge and skittering across the ground. The aldermen recoil. The mayor falters, gripping the rail once more. His voice wavers not in guilt, but in fear. A fear the crowd interprets as confirmation. The second stone is thrown with more force. Then a third. The guards step forward, forming a thin barrier. But there are too many people, too many lanterns, too many trembling voices demanding answers no official can give. The mayor tries once more to speak, but the words crumble beneath the rising cry of the crowd. Show us the truth. Bring out the doctors. Open the hospitals. Stop hiding the dead. Each shout is a strike against the fragile order of the city. Each voice stokes the fire smouldering beneath London's fear. And then, as if to seal the moment, the Guildhall window behind the mayor slams shut, loud enough to echo through the square. The crowd erupts. Guards pull the mayor backward, rushing him inside, as the first wave of people surges up the steps. Lanterns swing wildly. A woman's scream pierces the air. The aldermen disappear behind the heavy doors just as fists slam against the thick wood, rattling it in protest. The mayor's attempt to bring calm has failed, not because he lied, but because it is too late for truth. London does not want reassurance. London wants blame. London wants someone to answer for every shallow grave, every vanished patient, every midnight scream drifting from the hospitals. And as the crowd pounds against the Guildhall door, a realization settles over you like cold fog. There is no authority left that the people trust, and without trust, fear answers only to itself. Tonight, the riots will grow teeth, and the city's leaders, those who once stood above the chaos, will find themselves swallowed by it. Evening drapes itself over Bloomsbury like a heavy velvet curtain, muffling sound, swallowing the last scraps of daylight. You walk along the quiet edge of Russell Square, where the lampposts cast trembling halos across the slick pavement. The neighborhood feels unusually still, doors locked early, curtains drawn tight, voices hushed to whispers. There is a tension here, a feeling that something important is about to happen behind walls no ordinary Londoner is meant to see. At the far corner of the square stands a townhouse with no sign, its windows dark, its brass knocker dulled by disuse. It once belonged to a barrister, neighbors say, but tonight it has been claimed by different visitors, men with black coats, hurried steps, and the unmistakable posture of those carrying weight far heavier than medical bags. You watch as a final figure approaches, tall, breathless, glancing over his shoulder before slipping through the door. It shuts quickly behind him, the lock clicking like a swallowed secret. You inch closer, stopping beneath the bare branches of a tree. Light glows faintly from a slit between the curtains on the upper floor. Shadows move behind the glass, shifting shapes, silhouettes pacing, heads leaning close in sharp, urgent gestures. The physicians of London have gathered, not for treatment, not for instruction, for crisis. Inside, the air is thick with sweat and fear. A long table sits at the center of the room, cluttered with maps of the city, inked markings scattered across Broad Street, Old Nickel, Whitechapel, Bethnal Green. Notes lie beside them, case counts, symptoms, burial tallies, water samples. But no one studies these papers now. They pace, they argue. They wring their hands with the dread of men who have been blamed for saving too few lives and now are accused of taking them. Dr. Harland, the eldest among them, speaks first. His voice cracks with exhaustion as he recounts the mobs forming outside St. Bartholomew's, the stones thrown, the windows smashed. He speaks of a nurse dragged into a yard, of an apothecary's shop left in ruins. He speaks of a colleague who fell from a roof while trying to escape. They listen in grim silence, their faces drawn tight with grief. Another physician slams his fist onto the table. "We are being hunted," he says, voice trembling. "Hunted by the very people we've sworn to heal." A younger doctor argues that they must close the hospitals entirely, lock the doors, bar the windows, wait for order to return. Others argue it will only stoke the rumors further. Some insist they should go out into the streets, calm the people, explain the science. But every attempt to reason has already been drowned out by fear, too loud to hear anything else. And still, someone whispers about leaving the city altogether. That suggestion hangs suspended like a death knell. Others object violently. How dare they abandon their posts? How dare they leave London to burn without care? But then a man steps forward whose face is streaked with drying blood, not his own. He describes being dragged from a carriage, beaten until strangers intervened. He lifts his sleeve to reveal finger-shaped bruises encircling his arm. His voice lowers to a shudder. "They no longer want us alive." Silence follows, heavy, absolute. Someone suggests appealing directly to the mayor, to Parliament, to the newspapers. Someone else argues that the authorities have already lost the confidence of the people, that no public address can change minds now. They speak at length about cholera, about water contamination, about pumps and sewers, about statistics that should matter but no longer do. Fear has eclipsed the truth. The sickness is not the only plague now. Misinformation spreads faster, deadlier, impossible to treat with any known remedy. You watch as the shadows in the window move closer together, forming a circle. One doctor speaks with quiet resolve, urging unity. "We must protect each other. If the city turns against us completely, none will survive." Heads nod, reluctantly, desperately. They draft a plan not to heal, not to teach, not to lead, but to survive. Doctors will move in pairs. Routes will be avoided at night. Signals will be used between hospitals. Records will be hidden. Certain wards will be sealed, if only to prevent crowds from storming them. Every measure is meant not to stop cholera, but to stop the people from killing their healers. At last, the meeting ends. One by one, the physicians slip back out into the night, clutching lanterns, scanning the streets before stepping into shadow. Their coats flap behind them like mourning cloth. The last doctor pauses at the door and looks back, eyes shining with something that might be fear or resignation. He knows what you know now. Cholera is no longer London's only crisis. The city is turning on its own lifeline, and this secret meeting may be the final calm breath before the riots swallow everything the physicians hoped to save. The streets of Lambeth glisten with last night's rain as you make your way south of the river, where rows of narrow brick houses press close together like weary shoulders. Laundry hangs limp between windows, abandoned mid-chore. The market that should be opening by now is delayed. Crates remain untouched, tarps still tied down. People stand in small knots at the corners watching, whispering, waiting. Something happened here at dawn, something that has cracked the fragile silence of the district. You follow the murmurs to a modest house at the bend of Horselydown Lane, its front door open wide despite the cold. Inside, the scent of steam and boiled herbs clings to the air. A midwife lives here, Mrs. Finch, a woman known for delivering half the children in Lambeth, a woman whose hands have steadied more trembling mothers than most doctors ever will. She is a fixture of the neighbourhood, the kind of quiet guardian poor families trust implicitly. And this morning, she did something dangerous. She told the truth. You find her seated at her kitchen table, fingers trembling around a chipped mug of tea. Her apron is stained, her hair unravelling from its bun. Neighbours crowd the doorway, afraid to let her out of their sight, afraid to let the doctors come for her next. When she lifts her gaze to you, her eyes carry both exhaustion and a fierce, brittle resolve. She begins to speak before you can ask a single question. She tells you about the water, not rumors, not guesses, not superstition, evidence. She has been visiting families across Lambeth for weeks, mothers, infants, the frail, the sick. She noticed patterns before the doctors did, because she saw the water they boiled, the basins they filled, the buckets children carried from the pump. House after house with sudden illness, sweats, cramps, blue lips traced back to the same well, the same supply, the same invisible poison. Not air, not contagion brought by touch, not doctors choosing victims, water. She tried to tell them quietly at first, told the families to boil everything twice, told the butcher's wife to fetch water from the next street over, told the milk seller not to rinse her pails at the communal pump. But as the deaths grew, her voice grew louder. Yesterday, she confronted a physician in the street. A mistake. Not because she was wrong, but because she was right. Neighbours watched as she demanded he test the pump on Lambeth Road, demanded he stop treating patients and start investigating wells. She pointed out the clustering of deaths, the link between households, the way the disease tore through rooms that shared nothing but buckets of water drawn at the same hour. And the physician dismissed her, called her superstitious, called her hysterical, called her dangerous. Dangerous not to medicine but to fear. Fear needs no truth to survive, but truth can kill fear if spoken loud enough. So this morning, Mrs. Finch gathered the neighbours herself. At dawn she stood on an overturned apple crate, apron soaked from the night's deliveries, and told them everything she had seen. She told them the sickness was coming from below the city, not above. She told them to stop blaming doctors for deaths they were not causing. She told them to abandon the filthy pump before it claimed another child. Her words should have brought relief, should have brought order, should have brought hope, but instead they split the crowd in two. Some clung to her words like lifelines, faces softening, shoulders loosening, hope flickering for the first time in days. They believed her because she had held their children at birth, because she had sat beside their sisters during fevered nights, because she had delivered news no doctor ever softened. But others, those already ruined by grief, heard something else entirely. If the water was the cause, then why did the doctors not say so? If the water was the cause, then why did the doctors hide it? If the water was the cause, then why did so many die under medical care? Her truth became fuel. A man screamed that the doctors must have known, must have used the water to their advantage. A woman shouted that physicians still took bodies away, still locked doors, still kept secrets. A boy insisted he saw the midwife arguing with a doctor, as though she were uncovering something forbidden. And so the truth, raw, fragile, vital, became twisted into accusation. By the time Mrs. Finch returned to her home, the street had already split itself into factions, those who now feared water, and those who now feared healers even more. She sits now with shaking hands wrapped around her mug, as neighbours hover at her doorway like nervous sentinels, not protecting her from disease, protecting her from her own courage, because in a city ruled by fear, truth is the most dangerous thing of all, and the midwife who dared to speak it may have just made herself the next target of a city hunting its own saviours. You return to Broad Street just as dusk settles in a bruised violet over the rooftops, the kind of twilight that makes shadows stretch thin and uneasy across the cobblestones. The pump stands at the centre of the square like a silent sentinel, its iron body cold, its handle stiff with disuse. People walk a wide circle around it now, as though it carries a curse. The houses here, once bustling with the routines of early morning chores and evening chatter, now hold their breath. Windows stay shuttered, doors barely open. The street is quieter than a graveyard, but tonight the silence is broken. A crowd gathers, not the angry kind, not the torch-bearing kind, but something more solemn, curious, wary, hopeful in a way that feels frightening. They've been summoned by rumor of a man with a notebook, a man who has walked these streets for days, not with fear, but with purpose. A man who has studied maps instead of whispers. Dr. John Snow stands before the pump now, not one of the hospital physicians who have been dragged through the streets, not one of the men accused of stealing bodies or poisoning water. Snow is quieter, persistent, a man who has walked into homes where others would not dare step, offering neither comfort nor lies, only questions. He studies the pump with a gaze heavy and deliberate, the way a detective might examine the corner of a crime scene. In his hand is a small wrench, simple and unremarkable, yet in the tense hush of the evening, it feels like a weapon powerful enough to rewrite the city's fate. "You're certain?" Someone whispers behind you. Snow nods once, barely visible in the dying light. He has traced every case back to this spot. Every death, every collapse, every darkened home. He has drawn the lines on his map as veins, as rivers, and every path flows toward this single iron pump. The crowd steps closer, breaths held. For days, people have blamed doctors, hospitals, body snatchers, blue flags, cellar smoke. But Snow speaks only of water, contaminated, corrupted, crawling with something too small for the eye to see, but deadly enough to tear families apart in hours. Something invisible, yet more ruthless than any human conspiracy. Some deny it. They can't imagine that something so ordinary, so familiar, could be their executioner. But others look at the pump and see it with new eyes, its spout that poured water for breakfasts, its handle pressed by dozens of hands each morning, its base traced by children's fingerprints. What if this ordinary piece of iron is the monster they feared all along? Snow steps forward, reaches out, and grips the pump's handle. The metal moans softly at his touch. Then quietly, without ceremony, he loosens the bolts and removes the handle entirely. He lifts it into his hands. A gasp ripples through the crowd. Some recoil, some lean closer. Every person senses the significance of this moment, even if they do not yet trust it. A woman with tear-stung eyes clutches her shawl. "So, it's the water?" she whispers. "Not the doctors?" Snow doesn't answer with triumph or relief, only quiet certainty. It's the water. The truth, spoken plainly, is almost too much for the crowd to bear. A few sob, a few shake their heads in disbelief. A man sinks onto a doorstep, burying his face in his hands. If this is true, if the pump is to blame, then all the rage, all the fear, all the violence they unleashed upon their healers was misplaced. A woman murmurs, "We hunted the wrong enemy," but not everyone accepts it. A voice cuts through the square, sharp, desperate. "Lies! The doctors told us nothing. They hid the deaths. They took our children." A man steps forward, face flushed with grief and fury. He points at Snow's wrench as though it were a dagger. What proof does he have? He's just another of them. Others join him. Fear is not so easily uprooted, not even by truth. Some shout that removing the handle is a trick. Some insist the pump is harmless. Some cling desperately to the narrative they've built, too terrified to let it collapse. But something changes tonight, because for the first time, fear has competition not from comfort, not from authority, but from evidence. The pump handle lies in Snow's hands, glinting faintly in the lantern glow. A simple piece of metal. The potential end of an epidemic. The beginning of understanding. Behind you, someone whispers, voice tight with wonder. Maybe the sickness isn't evil. Maybe it's water. And in that revelation, fragile, trembling, easily crushed, you feel London shift. Not enough to stop the riots, but enough to start doubting them. And for a city on fire, doubt is the first drop of rain. Night clings thickly to Spitalfields, settling in layers over the crooked rooftops and narrow alleys like soot that cannot be washed away. You feel it before you see it, the shift in the air, the tremor beneath your feet, the distant roar swelling like a gathering storm. By the time you step onto Dorset Street, the glow is unmistakable. The fever hospital is burning. Flames lick the sky above the roof, bright against the ink-black night. rising in wild orange waves that turn the smoke into twisting phantoms. Sparks lift upward like fireflies fleeing the heat, carried on a wind that smells of pitch, lime, and something darker, something like fear made tangible. People crowd the street, faces washed in firelight. Children cling to their mothers' skirts. Men stand rigid, their shadows jerking across the walls. The heat pushes outward in pulsing waves. You can almost feel it breathing. Someone shouts for water. Someone else shouts to let it burn. You push through the crowd, following the tide of voices. The flames have begun to roar through the windows, shattering glass with sharp, crystalline cracks. The building groans, its beams swelling, buckling under the inferno's weight. You hear coughing inside, shouts muffled by smoke. Not everyone escaped. Not everyone was given time. A man grabs you, voice roar. They locked the doors, he says, pointing toward the flames with a shaking hand. Patients inside begging to get out, and the doctors barred them in, said it was for containment. Containment. His voice breaks into a sob. My brother was in there. He wasn't even dying. Whether his words are truth or terror, no one knows. Tonight, no one cares. A group of women cry out as the roof collapses inward, sending a tower of sparks spiraling into the sky. The crowd surges forward and then backward, instinct warring with rage. Flames spill from the shattered windows onto the street, lighting the cobblestones with serpent-like trails. Near the door, a cluster of men stands with torches still burning in their hands, faces grim, shirts damp with sweat. Their expressions are not triumphant, but resolute. One of them spits into the fire, jaw clenched. We warned them, he mutters. We warned them not to take another child. And so it begins to make sense. This was no accident. This was a verdict. Word traveled fast, too fast for the truth to keep pace. Stories of experiments, of marked bodies, of vanished patients. Tales of a child carried away alive and never returned. Rumors of doctors laughing behind locked ward doors. Lies mixed with truths until no one could distinguish them, until grief and rage forged something combustible. A scream rises behind you. A woman rushes toward the entrance, clawing at the air, trying to push through the men restraining her. Her daughter was taken here yesterday, she cries. She was only ill, not dying. The girl begged not to stay. Now the fire hisses her name back in cruel echoes. Her anguish strikes the crowd like a struck match. Anger ignites anew. Someone hurls a stone at the building. It vanishes into the flames with a hiss. Another man slams a wooden beam against the smouldering doorframe as if punishing it. A voice shouts that no doctor should be allowed to escape this time. Another calls for the hospital records to expose whatever evil was done inside. The flames grow taller, greedier. A section of wall gives way, collapsing into the street with a burst of sparks. The crowd retreats in a flurry of shouts, shielding their eyes. And in the shifting shadows, you see something chilling. A doctor crouched behind a toppled cart, trembling, hair singed, coat half burnt. He crawled out a back window, smoke blackened, barely conscious. He looks toward the crowd, eyes pleading, voice tiny and cracked. Please, help. But those nearest him step back, not out of fear of fire, but fear of him. Someone whispers, he's the one who marked the patients. Someone else, let him feel what they felt. The doctor collapses, coughing, eyes watering as he tries to stand. You know he will not make it far. The flames behind him reflect in the eyes of the crowd, eyes that no longer see a healer, but a threat. The fever hospital finally surrenders to the fire, sinking inward with a low, shuddering groan. A plume of smoke unfurls across the rooftops, spreading over the city like a dark banner. And as the last surviving beam collapses in a shower of sparks, you realize London is crossing a threshold from which there is no return. Hospitals are no longer sanctuaries. Doctors are no longer trusted. Reason is no longer louder than fear. Tonight, the city did more than burn a building. It declared war on those who once fought to keep it alive. and the flames now devouring the fever hospital are only the first the city will see. Morning drags itself slowly over Stepney, grey and half-hearted, as if the sun is reluctant to illuminate what happened here during the night. The streets glisten with damp, though no rain fell. Windows sit cracked open, curtains trembling with the faintest draught, as neighbours peer out with the wary stillness of prey. Stepney has always carried a hum beneath its brickwork, a restless energy of dockworkers and sailors, markets and alehouses. But today the hum is gone. In its place is something tighter, sharper, stretched thin across every doorway. A doctor has disappeared, and no one, not even those who once sought his help, wants to say his name too loudly. Dr. Harrington was not beloved, but he was respected. A tall man with steady hands and a quiet voice, known for arriving at houses long after other physicians had retreated to warmth and supper. He was the one who tended to the fevered children in mud-floored cottages, the one who crossed the marsh path, even when fog swallowed everything beyond arm's length. He carried a habit of writing notes in a small leather book, jotting every symptom, every shift in pulse. Some called it diligence, others, in the past weeks, called it evidence. And last night, he vanished. You walk the narrow path near the marsh where his footsteps were last heard, reported by a fisherman who swears he saw Harrington's lantern bobbing like a pale firefly along the banks. The fisherman says he watched the doctor pause, kneel, examine something on the ground, and then suddenly the lantern dropped, rolled twice, went out. The fisherman didn't go closer. No one goes closer after dark now. His disappearance alone would be strange, but the whispers that follow it turn strange into sinister. A charwoman claims she saw 3 men following him earlier that evening, faces half covered by scarves, their shadows stretching long across the street behind him. A shopkeeper says the doctor passed by his window with an expression he'd never seen before. Not exhaustion, not grief, but fear. A group of boys insist they heard a shout from the marsh, then the splash of something heavy thrown into water. Rumours bloom faster than truth ever could. Some insist Harrington fled London out of guilt for the bodies piling inside his ward. Others say the patients' families finally caught him, dragging him across the marsh to force confessions from him. A few claim the doctors silenced him themselves, afraid he had uncovered some terrible secret they meant to keep buried. But the most chilling whisper comes from an elderly woman who crouches near the marsh's edge, her fingers tracing invisible circles in the mud. "He was taken," she murmurs without lifting her gaze. "Just like the others." "Others?" you ask, and her cloudy eyes drift toward you with a hollow calm. 3 this week, she says. Doctors who knew too much. Healers who asked the wrong questions. They vanish first in the mind, she adds softly, tapping her temple, then in the streets. Her words cling to your thoughts as you examine the scene. The marsh path bears strange impressions, drags, scuffs, boot prints overlapping. No single story stands clear, but whatever happened was not quiet, nor natural, nor peaceful. Something dragged through here, something resisted, something lost, and yet no body has surfaced. No coat, no bag, no small notebook that never left his pocket. Nothing but the broken shape of reeds at the water's edge, bent as if trampled by frantic feet. When you return to the neighbourhood, you find people gathered outside Harrington's lodgings. His window stands open, his room ransacked not by thieves, but by neighbours searching for proof of his wrongdoing. They fling his notes into the street, pages fluttering like startled birds. Children run after them, grabbing the ones with drawings, maps of wells, sketches of pumps, crude diagrams of water flow. Some read them and gasp, others crumple them angrily, shouting that the doctors were watching them like rats in an experiment. A man steps out from the doorway, face tight, gripping a small leather book. Harrington's, the last one he ever wrote in. He claims it holds evidence of his guilt. Another claims it holds evidence of his innocence. Both are too afraid to open it. By midday, the crowd disperses, leaving behind a hollow quiet. Harrington's door hangs open. His lantern sits on the table, wick still damp, and the marsh path, cold, slick, empty, waits for the next footstep that may never come. As you stand there, the weight of the truth sinks slowly into your bones. In a city consumed by panic, it no longer matters whether Dr. Harrington fled or was taken. What matters is that he is gone, and with each vanished healer, London loses another thread of stability, another barrier between fear and total collapse. The marsh holds its silence. The city holds its breath, and somewhere, in the places where truth drowns beneath rumor, another doctor walks the streets, not knowing he will be next. The houses along Hanbury Street crouch close together in the cold morning light, their bricks still dark with the night's damp. A thin mist lingers between the chimneys like a ghost reluctant to leave. The street is quieter than it should be, too quiet. Even the costermongers who normally bark their wares at dawn move with subdued steps today, glancing often toward the row of small terraced homes where something unusual has happened. A letter appeared on a doorstep during the night, and now the entire neighborhood feels it like a bruise. You follow the hush toward number 17, a narrow house with peeling blue paint around the window frames. A woman stands at the door, thin, exhausted, hair hastily pinned up, clutching a folded sheet of paper as though it might burn her fingers. She doesn't speak as you approach. She simply hands it to you, her expression hollow and frightened. The letter is written in a hurried, uneven hand. The ink is smudged in places, as if splattered by trembling fingers. There is no signature, no greeting, only a warning, carved out in shaky lines. Do not call the doctor, do not let them inside. They came for me, and they will come for you next. A chill moves through you, not because of the words themselves, but because of how quickly people believe them. The neighbors cluster around, each offering their version of how the letter arrived. Someone claims they heard footsteps on the cobblestones just after midnight, light, cautious, but fast. Someone else insists they saw a shadow kneel at the doorstep, then vanish before she could reach the window. A child says he heard whispering outside, though whether it was a voice or wind only he can know. The woman whose door it was left upon begins to shake. Her husband has been ill for 2 days, nothing dramatic at first, only cramps and fatigue. She wanted to send for a physician this morning. Now she's terrified to even light a lamp. A man steps forward, jaw clenched, insisting the letter must be real. He says the handwriting resembles that of his cousin, who vanished the week before after being taken to the infirmary. Another woman argues that the warning matches rumors she heard about doctors marking doors for collection. A third insists the letter came from someone who escaped the hospitals, someone who witnessed horrors no man could survive, unchanged. The crowd grows thicker, drawn by fear, the same way flies collect around a lantern. You unfold the letter further, looking for more. On the back, a second message is scrawled, as if added in desperation. They know who is sick before you tell them. They watch the pumps. They follow the carts. Do not trust their hands. A shudder moves through the neighbors as you read the words aloud. Panic sharpens their faces, their voices, their imaginations. The letter is quickly becoming more powerful than any truth spoken in its shadow. The woman clutches her arms to her chest, haunted by the idea that someone watched her husband's weakening and left the message as a final mercy. She fears calling for help. She fears not calling. Every option feels poisoned. A constable arrives, drawn by the crowd. He snatches the letter from your hand and frowns deeply as he reads it. But instead of dismissing it, he grows pale. Either he recognizes the handwriting, or he, too, now doubts the safety of the city's healers. He orders everyone back into their homes, but his voice cracks, and no one obeys. Instead, someone demands to know who left the letter. Someone else demands protection, and someone voice-breaking asks the question that hovers over all of them. What if it's true? The constable has no answer, neither does anyone else. The letter, so small and fragile, has become a spark. It feeds on fear. It spreads from hand to hand. It travels across the street like wildfire, leaping between rooftops. Before long, copies will be made. Before long, it will reach other neighborhoods. Before long, it will become a story no one questions. You step back from the door, feeling the weight of the paper even after it leaves your hand. In a city collapsing under grief and rumor, a single anonymous warning has more power than science, than reason, than truth. And tomorrow, when another letter appears on another doorstep, London will be that much closer to tearing itself apart. Because now, fear doesn't just whisper, it writes. The Strand is never truly silent, not in daylight, not after dark, not even in the deepest hours when the city seems to exhale. Carriages rumble, vendors shout, taverns spill laughter and arguments onto the pavements. But tonight, as you step onto the wide thoroughfare, all that familiar noise has been swallowed whole. The street feels strange, stretched, thinned, like something holding its breath. And then you hear it, a sound low at first, then rising, a tide of voices swelling at the eastern end. The riot on the Strand has begun. You move toward the river of people, lanterns bobbing in the darkness like scattered stars. The crowd is massive, larger than any gathering since the first whispers of sickness began. Hundreds pack the street shoulder to shoulder, a living wave of grief, fear, and something sharper. Men stand on crates, shouting through cupped hands. Women clutch their shawls tightly, eyes bright with anger or anguish. Children cling to their parents, pulled along by a tide too strong to resist. At the front of the mass stands a cluster of men carrying poles, sticks, boards, anything that can become a weapon when grief demands one. They shout about the hospitals, about the vanished patients, about the blue flags on the dead carts. Their voices crack from strain, but the emotion behind them only grows. They're taking the sick before they die. Someone roars. "They're poisoning the wells," cries another. "They've marked the houses they'll come for next." Fear has become fact. Rumor has become law. A man climbs atop a makeshift platform, nothing more than a barrel overturned, and holds up something that glints in the torchlight. A pump handle. The Broad Street pump handle that Dr. Snow removed the night before. In the man's hand, it becomes a trophy, a weapon, proof of something sinister. "They took this off to hide what they've done," he cries, "to bury their crimes." The truth, fragile and quiet, cannot compete with the roar of the crowd. You push forward just as the mob surges toward the building they've chosen. As tonight's target, a physician's lodging house on the corner of the Strand, tall and narrow, windows shuttered tight. The doctors inside have already barred the door, but everyone knows they are there. A lantern glows faintly behind an upper window, trembling with movement. The crowd stops before the door, not because they hesitate, but because they are waiting for a spark. And it comes from the smallest voice among them, a girl no older than 10 steps forward. Her face is streaked with tears, her hair tangled, her hands clutching the hem of her dress. She speaks so softly at first that only those nearest her hear. "My mother went into that house. They said she'd be safe. She didn't come back." The words ripple outward, whispered from person to person until they become a wave. Men tighten their grip on their makeshift weapons. Women step closer, some shouting for justice, others screaming for answers. The little girl stands still, trembling, as if the memory of her mother's last breath is stitched into her bones. Then someone throws the first stone. It arcs through the air and shatters the upper window. Glass rains down. The lantern behind the shutters swings wildly. Another stone follows, then another. Soon the air is filled with the sound of shattering glass, splintering wood, breaking order. The door rattles beneath the force of bodies slamming into it. The walls tremble with each blow. Inside, you hear frantic shouts, doctors pleading for calm, their voices drowned by the storm outside. Someone lights a torch. Someone else grabs a barrel to use as a battering ram. The door bursts inward with a crash that shakes the stones. The crowd pours in. You try to follow, but the force of bodies is overwhelming. Flames spill across the floor as the torch slips from a hand. Furniture crashes, papers scatter. A terrified voice shouts for mercy too late. The building begins to burn. Smoke rushes into the street as people scramble back, some horrified, some triumphant, all unsteady. The flames climb quickly up the wooden stairwell, reaching for the upper rooms where terrified figures move behind broken windows. The riot is no longer a protest, it is an execution. And as you step back into the cold night air, watching the fire leap higher against the Strand's darkened sky, a truth settles into your chest like ash. London is done listening. London is done fearing quietly. London has turned fear into fire. And tonight, the doctors learn that a city grieving and desperate can burn hotter than any flame. The streets of Bethnal Green have always held the sound of struggle cartwheels grinding over worn cobblestone, children shouting over thin fences, women calling their families in at nightfall. But this morning, as you step beneath the pale light breaking through a torn patch of sky, the familiar noise is gone. In its place sits a heavy, deliberate quiet, one that trembles with intent, because the people here have built barricades. You see them before you reach the heart of the neighborhood, makeshift walls rising from the center of the road, built from whatever frightened hands could grab in the dark hours. Broken furniture, splintered crates, overturned carts, sacks of sand pilfered from the river wharfs, even doors ripped from their hinges. The structures stand like crude wooden beasts, snarling outward, blocking every entryway into the narrow veins of Bethnal Green. Two boys with soot-smeared faces perch atop one barricade like sentries, their eyes wide and sleepless. They clutch, broom handles shaved to points. Behind them, a woman with red-rimmed eyes ties a rope across a shuttered alley, her fingers shaking but determined. The barricades are not meant to keep out sickness. They are meant to keep out doctors. A crowd gathers as you approach, men bundled in patched coats, women gripping the arms of their husbands, elders leaning heavily on canes carved by trembling hands. The fear in their eyes is no longer scattered or panicked. It is organized, sharpened, ready. A man with a deep scar along his jaw steps forward. He wears a butcher's apron stained not with fresh work but with yesterday's fear. He explains what drove them here, what forced their hands. Last night, he says, the doctors came too close. A murmur travels the length of the crowd. People press closer, listening, remembering. They walk down Hare Marsh, he continues, after dark. 4 of them, carrying bags, saying they were checking on the sick, but they didn't knock on a single door. Another man, one of the coal porters, steps forward to add his piece. He saw shadows moving between houses, heard footsteps under his window, glimpsed the flash of metal tools catching lamplight. A woman interrupts with trembling fury. They marked our doors, she says. I wiped the chalk off myself. Others nod vigorously. Some saw chalk, some imagined it. No one doubts it. Fear makes even shadows feel like warnings. A child clings to her mother's skirts, her small voice barely a whisper. They took Mrs. Atwood's baby. The mother hushes her, but the words linger in the air like smoke, feeding the crowd's certainty. No one knows exactly what happened in the Strand last night, but news of fire travels fast. Entire households here huddled behind locked shutters, listening to distant shouts, watching orange light flicker against the sky. They heard that doctors fled the flames. They heard that bodies burned before families could claim them. They heard that London has turned, so Bethnal Green prepares to turn too. The barricades are proof. Women stack bricks with mechanical precision. Men carry timber scavenged from abandoned stables. Someone drags a rusted iron oven door and wedges it between 2 beams, reinforcing the structure like a shield. Children haul stones in baskets, placing them at the foot of the barricade in wobbling piles. Every movement is a declaration. No more doctors, no more carts, no more taking the sick. A man with a trembling voice rises on top of an upturned barrel to address the crowd. His wife fell ill the previous evening. He refuses to let anyone near her, not neighbors, not clergy, not midwives. He is terrified of losing her, but more terrified of handing her over to hands he believes will claim her before she's gone. His words ignite the air. "We keep our own," he says. "We bury our own. We protect our own." Cheers break through the cold morning like sparks, climbing the walls, rattling windows. For a moment, the crowd looks less afraid than triumphant. But triumph built on fear is thin, fragile, easily shattered. You feel a shift, subtle, hidden beneath the noise as you watch a mother glance over her shoulder toward her house. You see guilt pinch her face. You see the dread living behind her eyes. You see the truth she cannot say aloud. Sickness has already entered their homes. Their barricades keep out doctors, but they do not keep out cholera. And as the crowd's chanting rises, filling the street like a war drum, the barricades loom larger, casting long shadows across the bricks, shadows that divide one half of the city from the other, shadows that mark the beginning of a neighborhood willing to risk everything, even its own survival, to keep imagined horrors at bay. Bethnal Green has taken its stand, and London has one more line drawn in a city preparing for war with its own healers. Dawn breaks over Mile End with a watery, uncertain light, the kind that makes everything look softer than it is. But softness has no place here now. As you walk along the row of terraced houses leaning slightly, their bricks smudged with decades of coal smoke, you feel the tension before you see it. The street is too still. Curtains flutter though no breeze moves. Doors remain cracked open just enough for watching eyes. London has learned to look through its cracks. At the very end of the street stands the Weaver home, its door wide open, the frame splintered from the night before. The neighbours keep their distance, hovering in small clusters, as if the air around the doorway is poisoned. You hear their whispers low, trembling, carrying the weight of things that cannot be undone. A physician came here last night, and he barely escaped with his life. You step slowly toward the house, taking in the details: the overturned stool near the threshold, the smashed water jug in the yard, the blood stain fading into the dirt, as if the earth itself is trying to forget what it witnessed. Mrs. Weaver sits on the front step, her shawl wrapped tightly around her thin shoulders despite the growing light. Her eyes look hollowed out, as if someone scooped away the parts that once held hope. She doesn't lift her gaze until you stand before her. "He came to help," she whispers before you can speak. "I know he did." Inside the house, you hear soft moans, her husband struggling against the sickness that now coils in his gut, draining the color from his face, pulling him closer to the edge with every hour. Mrs. Weaver explains that he had worsened after sunset, his breathing shallow, his skin turning the same dull blue that has become the city's new ghost. She had no choice but to send for a doctor despite the whispers, despite the rumors, despite the barricades rising across nearby streets. Desperation makes even the most terrified hearts reach for help. Dr. Keating arrived shortly after nightfall. A quiet man, small-framed, steady hands. The kind of physician who still carried his mother's rosary in his pocket, touching it quietly between patient visits. He hurried into the house without hesitation, without asking about payment or risk. He examined Mr. Weaver. He boiled water. He prepared laudanum drops to ease the pain. He did what physicians have done for centuries, even when the city has turned on them. But his presence did not go unnoticed. A group of neighbors spotted his lanterns glow through the window. Their grief-sharpened minds turned quickly, too quickly, to suspicion. Why was a doctor visiting after dark? Why had he slipped into the house without speaking to anyone? Why was he staying so long? Rumors swept the street like sparks across dry timber. They're marking the sick. They're taking bodies before death. They're choosing houses next. And then someone recognized him from the Strand, from the hospital riots, from the flames that swallowed the fever ward. Someone swore they saw him taking notes earlier in the day, standing near a pump. Someone else shouted that doctors were mapping their neighborhood, choosing who would be taken next. The crowd gathered quickly, anger a living thing, breathing through the street, growing larger with every step. Mrs. Weaver's voice cracks as she recounts what happened next. They stormed through the doorway. They surrounded him. They knocked the medical bag from his hands. They accused him of poisoning her husband. They dragged him across the room, out into the yard, his coat ripping at the seams. Dr. Keating tried to explain, tried to reach for his tools, to show them the tinctures, to point to his notes. But his explanations were swallowed by shouts, by grief, by rage so thick it choked out reason. One man raised a brick. Another grabbed the doctor's arm. A woman screamed for them to stop. It was Mrs. Weaver who hurled herself between them, shielding the man who had come to save her husband. Her voice rises now with trembling conviction. He would have died here. Right here. They would have killed him. She managed to scream long enough for a constable to appear at the far end of the street. The crowd scattered like startled birds, leaving the physician bruised, bloodied, trembling in the dirt. The constable dragged him away, not to arrest him, but to save him. Dr. Keating fled into the night, disappearing somewhere beyond Mile End Road. Whether he reached shelter or succumbed to his injuries, no one knows. No one dares ask. Inside the house, Mr. Weaver moans again. Mrs. Weaver rushes to him, her feet leaving faint prints in the dust. She pauses at the doorway, looking back with eyes full of fear and gratitude and despair. "He came to help," she repeats softly. "And we nearly buried him." As the sun rises fully, casting light onto the splintered doorway, you feel the truth settle like a stone in your chest. This was the physician's last house call, and it will not be the last time London mistakes a desperate act of mercy for a threat worth killing. Even before you reach Whitechapel Road, you hear it, the squeal of wooden wheels straining under weight, the rhythmic creak of an old axle, the low groan of horses reluctant to move forward. The sound has become a grim part of London's nightly chorus, but tonight it does not pass quietly under the lamplight. Tonight, the dead cart slows. Tonight, the people step into its path. The moon hangs low over the rooftops, a pale, trembling coin barely piercing the fog. Lanterns burn weakly along the street, their glow flickering with every gust of cold wind. Shops stand shuttered. Taverns whisper rather than sing. Mothers pull their children inside as you pass, as if sensing the night is charged with something volatile, an invisible crackle beneath the cobblestones. At the center of the road, gathered around the dead cart, stands a crowd, men with fists clenched, women with jaws set in grim lines, children peering from behind their skirts. The driver, a gaunt man with a kerchief tied over his mouth, sits rigid on his bench, gripping the reins so tightly they tremble. The horse shifts uneasily, blowing clouds of warm breath into the cold night. The cart behind them is covered with a heavy black tarp, sagging in the middle under a burden too heavy to hide. Everyone knows what lies beneath, but tonight, knowing is not enough. A man steps forward. His voice shakes, not with fear, but fury. "Show us." The driver stiffens. He refuses. He mutters that the bodies are taken to be blessed, to be buried with dignity, to prevent the spread of sickness. He insists that the cart carries only the dead. No doctor touches him, he swears. No tricks, no experiments. But the crowd has heard too many stories. Stories of children taken before their time. Stories of relatives who vanished from beds before their last breath escaped. Stories of doctors marking doors in the night. Stories of bodies burned before families could claim them. Rumor is the only currency that spends cleanly in these streets. A woman steps forward, face pale, hair unbound, eyes burning with the desperation of someone who has lost more than she can carry. She points a trembling hand at the cart. "My father was taken last night," she says. Still warm, the crowd murmurs, shifts, tightens around the wooden wheels. The driver swears he took only the dead. He swears no one was breathing when they were loaded. But his voice is unconvincing, brittle as frost on window glass. Another voice rises, a fisherman, broad-shouldered, eyes wild. He heard groaning from within a dead cart once. He swears it. He tells the crowd he followed it for a full street. listening to the sound of knuckles dragging against wood beneath the tarp. The crowd gasps. The rumor grows teeth. Someone shouts to pull the tarp. Someone else shouts to tip the cart over entirely. Someone, voice cracking with grief, screams that the doctors are stealing the dying to hide their failures. The driver raises a shaking hand. You don't want to see, but it is too late for warnings. A young man climbs onto the wheel hub, gripping a lantern in one hand and the tarp in the other. With a swift tug, he pulls it back. A hush falls. Blankets cover the bodies beneath dozens of shapes, each wrapped tightly in coarse cloth. The smell hits you next, an unmistakable sweetness of decay mixed with lime. The shapes are still, all except one. A corner of a blanket twitches, just slightly, as if something beneath it shifted, as if someone drew their last breath later than the driver believed, or as if the air moved differently around the bodies in that moment, stirring shadows more than flesh. It doesn't matter. To the crowd, the twitch is proof. Women scream. Men shout curses. Someone hurls a lantern at the cart. It explodes against the wheel, flames licking the rim before sputtering out in the damp. The horse rears, terrified. The driver nearly falls from his seat as the cart tilts. "Stop!" he cries, voice cracking with something deeper than fear. "Stop, please. You don't understand." But the crowd does not want understanding. They want certainty. They want blame they can hold in their hands. A rope appears. Someone loops it around the cart's axle. Dozens of hands pull. The cart tips, then topples, crashing onto its side with a deafening thud. Bodies spill onto the cobblestones, blankets unraveling, limbs bending in unnatural arcs. A young woman drops to her knees beside one of the bodies, sobbing uncontrollably. Whether the corpse is her father or a stranger hardly matters. Her grief feeds the fire more than any truth could. The driver flees into the shadows, coat flapping, boots thudding against the stones. No one chases him. Their eyes remain fixed on the spilled bodies, on the shaking blankets, on the evidence imagined or real that the doctors have wronged them. And as the crowd gathers around the toppled cart, torches rising, voices rising, something cold settles into your bones. This is no longer a riot. This is a reckoning. A city tearing itself apart, not because of cholera, but because fear has made the living indistinguishable from the dead. And tonight, on Whitechapel Road, London has declared that it will trust no one, not even those who come for the bodies after breath has left them. Night drapes itself over Clerkenwell with a thickness that feels almost intentional, as though the darkness wants to shield what the daylight can no longer protect. St. James's Church rises from the square in stark silhouette, its crooked spire cutting into the sky, its stones darkened by centuries of soot, its windows shuttered against a world that has begun to turn feral. But tonight, the church is not a sanctuary, it is a hiding place. You hear the whispers before you push the gate open. Children, hushed by frantic mothers. Men speaking in murmurs behind sleeves. Lanterns flicker near the entrance, guarded not by clergy but by parishioners keeping watch with broom handles and broken chair legs. Their posture is taut, defensive. You recognize the posture of people protecting something they are afraid to admit they're protecting. As you step inside the nave, cold air sinks around you like a dropped curtain. The familiar scent of stone and old wood is drowned beneath something sharper disinfectant. Sweat, fear. The pews are empty, their shadows stretching across the floor like reaching hands. Somewhere deeper in the church, a muffled sound echoes a cough, weak and strained, and then you notice the rope. It hangs over the stairwell leading down into the crypt, tied to the banister, as if countless hands have grabbed it in fear or urgency. A young curate stands nearby, thin hands clasped, shoulders trembling. When he spots you, his eyes widen not with suspicion, but with a quiet warning. "He's below," the curate whispers. They would have torn him apart in the street. You descend the narrow stone steps, each footfall echoing down the passage. The air grows colder, heavier. The ceiling lowers until you almost have to bow your head. The crypt is a maze of low arches and burial recesses, the walls carved with names long since forgotten. And at the far corner, huddled beside a pile of crates, sits Dr. Ames. His coat is torn, his cheek is bruised. One sleeve hangs in tatters where someone nearly grabbed him during the confusion in the Strand. His medical bag lies open beside him, its contents scattered like the remnants of a life he used to lead. Bandages, a cracked bottle of laudanum, a small notebook filled with hurried sketches of lungs, intestines, water pumps. He looks up when you step closer. For a long moment, he says nothing. His breath ghosts in the cold air. "I had 3 patients tonight," he whispers finally, voice hollow. A mother, her infant, and a boarder in the same house. They were all alive when I left them. He pulls his knees closer to his chest. "But the crowd said I killed them." You sit beside him on the stone floor, the chill seeping through your clothes. Above you, faint murmurs drift from the nave, voices of the parishioners who smuggled him inside, hiding him under cloaks and blankets, while the rioters combed Bowyer Street. He rubs his swollen knuckles absently. "They saw me carrying my bag," he murmurs, "and they thought it was... they thought..." His voice falters. He presses his forehead into his hands. "I've delivered their babies. I've treated their mothers. I've sat with their dying. And now they want my blood." Footsteps echo overhead. Heavy ones. Not the curate, not a parishioner. You both freeze. The curate appears at the stairwell, face pale as chalk. "They're searching the neighborhood," he whispers urgently. "They saw light through the window. They think we're hiding someone." And then is explained to I've present. Dr. Ames's breathing quickens. His eyes dart to the scattered tools at his feet. He grabs the notebook, the only thing he seems unwilling to leave behind, and clutches it tight. "We can't let them find him," the curate says. "If they search the crypt, he doesn't finish. He doesn't have to." The parishioners extinguish lanterns above, plunging the crypt into near darkness. Shadows gather between the arches, swallowing the carved names of the dead. Dr. Ames shrinks into the corner, every muscle taut, as though he expects the stone itself to turn on him. Boots thud across the nave. A door slams. A man shouts, demanding they search everything. The curate's voice rises thin but steady, blocking their path, arguing that illness dwells here, that the dead rest below, that no one would dare disturb a crypt. The men hesitate. The superstition that fear hasn't yet stripped from them helps him. But for how long? You sit silently in the darkness beside Dr. Ames, listening as the rioters argue with the curate overhead. The physician trembles so hard you can feel it through the stone. His breath comes in ragged gasps. His fingers clutch the notebook like a lifeline filled not with conspiracies, but with maps of contaminated wells, sketches of water lines, notes that might one day save lives. The irony is cruel. The city believes he's killing them, but he may be the only one trying to save them. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, the boots retreat. Doors slam. Voices drift away. The curate descends the steps again, shoulders sagging with relief. "You'll have to stay," he says quietly. "At least until dawn." Dr. Ames nods, though the relief comes with exhaustion so deep it threatens to swallow him. He leans back against the cold stone wall, closing his eyes. For a moment, the crypt is silent, not peaceful, but suspended. Then, softly, Dr. Ames whispers the truth he's too tired to swallow any longer. "They're not dying because of us. They're dying because we're too late." His words settle into the crypt, sinking as deeply as the bones buried in the walls. Above you, the parishioners resume their quiet vigil. Below, the doctor curls into himself, hiding from a city he once vowed to heal. And you feel it as surely as the cold pressing into your bones. London has begun to hide its physicians, in the same darkness where it hides its dead. Dawn rises over Shoreditch in a thin, reluctant smear of grey light, without warmth, morning without promise. The streets here are cramped and crooked, stitched together by narrow lanes that echo every footstep. But today, as you walk toward the bend of Red Lion Court, the street feels different. The air is thick, tense, heavy with a dread that clings to doorframes like soot, because at number 9, a family has locked themselves inside, and no one, neither neighbors, nor constable, nor priest, can convince them to open the door. You see the house before you reach it. The curtains have been pinned shut with nails. The windows have been coated with lard to block visibility. The front door is barricaded from within. A heavy dresser has been dragged across the threshold, its legs jutting beneath the crack. A length of rope winds through the door handle and loops around a large iron hook hammered directly into the wall. Every precaution speaks of fear so severe it no longer resembles caution. A small crowd gathers across the street. They stand silent, as if the house might hear them. Children cling to their mothers' skirts. Men clutch lanterns, dimmed by the morning. Women whisper prayers into shaking hands. They've been inside 2 days, someone says. No doctor, no vicar, no one allowed in. Not even to fetch water. They say if anyone steps through the door, they'll kill him. No one knows how the family fell ill. Some say it was the mother, who felt a tightness in her stomach. Others say it was the eldest son, who collapsed during his shift loading crates. Still others claim the sickness came with a bucket of water fetched from the pump at dusk. But once the first cramps began, the household sealed itself away, not from disease, but from the people outside. You move closer, careful not to startle them. Through the door, you hear the faint rustle of movement footsteps dragging across floorboards, a muffled cough, the desperate whisper of a child's voice. The walls absorb these sounds like a body soaking in fever. A constable steps forward and raps gently on the door. "Mrs. Mallory," it's Constable Finch. "We only want to help." From inside comes a sharp, disjointed reply, a voice hoarse with fear. "No doctors, no carts. Leave us be." Her words tremble, cracking in the middle as if held together by threads worn thin. A neighbor calls out next, a woman with red eyes who clutches a basket pressed tightly to her chest. "Mary, love, we've brought broth. Just open the shutter, just the shutter. Let us pass it through." Inside, a child begins to sob. The mother hushes him, voice shaking. "They'll take you," she whispers. "They'll take you like they took the others." She believes it with absolute certainty. She believes the city hunts the sick. She believes opening the door is signing her children's death. Her fear is a cage, one she built herself, one she cannot see beyond. The constable tries again, speaking softly. "No one will take anyone. You have my word." A harsh laugh echoes from the other side. "Your word?" Then, more quietly, "Words burned in the hospital, didn't they? Words couldn't protect the men on the Strand." The crowd shifts uneasily. Every attempt at comfort is swallowed by memories of riots, fires, vanished doctors. You take a slow breath and try yourself. You tell her the truth as gently as you can, that cholera is spreading through the pumps, that physicians are not the enemy, that people are sealing themselves away in fear and dying for lack of water, not poison. Silence follows. For a moment, you think she might listen, but then the eldest son speaks, voice trembling, thick with fever. "They marked the neighbor's door," he rasps. "I saw it. I wiped it away myself." A pause. "They're coming for us next." His words are the final lock. Inside the house, the fear thickens until even the walls seem to pulse with it. You hear movement, furniture scraping, something heavy dragged across floorboards. They're reinforcing the barricade. They are preparing to die behind it rather than let anyone in. A woman in the crowd begins to weep. "You'll starve," she cries. "You'll die without water." Inside, the mother replies quietly, brokenly, "Better by God's hand than theirs." Her resignation sinks into the street, chilling the morning. And suddenly you understand. This house is not refusing help. It is refusing hope. Hope requires trust. Trust requires truth, and London has run out of both. The constable steps back. The neighbours fall silent. No one knows what to do. The door remains shut. The windows remain sealed. The house stands rigid, a tomb waiting to be filled. You take one last look at the shadow moving behind the curtain, small, fragile, trembling, and your chest tightens with the kind of helplessness that leaves a bruise. Because you know, as surely as the cold morning wind, the Mallory family will not last the night, not because of cholera, but because fear has sealed their fate from within, and the rest of London watches, powerless, as another household is swallowed, not by disease, but by terror. Night drifts over Limehouse like a slow tide, swallowing colour, muting sound, turning every corner into a question. The docks creak with the weight of moored ships, ropes straining softly as the river pulls against them. Lanterns flicker in doorways, illuminating only slivers of the narrow lanes before surrendering to darkness. You walk deeper into the maze of alleys until the smell of fish and coal smoke becomes something sharper, fear left too long in stagnant air. The residents here rarely sleep now. They linger behind cracked shutters, watching the world outside with feral suspicion. But tonight, a different kind of stillness settles in the alley behind Barlow Court, the kind that follows a discovery no one wants to speak aloud. A small group stands at the alley's mouth, dock workers, washerwomen, a boy clutching an empty coal scuttle. They murmur among themselves, shifting uneasily. Their lanterns cast jittering shadows against the brick wall ahead, revealing something faint, something chalky, a symbol, a simple white X smeared across the bricks, its lines crude, hastily drawn. Fresh, the crowd swears it appeared some time after dusk. A mark, a warning, a death sentence. To them, the symbol means only one thing: the doctors have chosen their next house. A woman steps forward, clutching her shawl around her shoulders. Mrs. Bell, her face pale, her eyes swollen from crying. Her daughter lies inside the marked home, limbs curled in pain, skin cold with the early signs of cholera. She had planned to send for a midwife, but now she stands frozen in the alley, staring at the chalk as though it might burst into flame. "They marked us," she whispers, voice cracking. "They marked my child," the others murmur, their fear thickening like fog. "They come at night. They take the sick ones first. No one who's marked ever comes back. They say the bodies don't even reach the burial grounds." You look closely. The chalk line is uneven, smudged, drawn by a shaky hand. You suspect it was done not by a doctor but by a frightened neighbour repeating a rumour, mistaking sickness for danger, echoing a lie crafted by a terrified city. But the truth carries no weight here. Only fear does. A man kneels beside the wall, pressing his fingers to the chalk. His hands tremble, his breath ragged. "My brother's house was marked 2 nights ago," he says. "They came before dawn." "Who?" someone demands. He shakes his head. "I don't know." Men. Could have been doctors. Could have been constables. Could have been... He does not finish. The crowd finishes for him. "They took him?" The man lowers his eyes. "He didn't come home." The alley tightens with panic. Mrs. Bell sinks to her knees. "I can't let them take her. I won't." Her voice breaks something inside the people gathered there. Anger rises, thick, dark, immediate. A fisherman lifts his lantern. "We'll wipe it off," he declares. "We'll hide her." A murmur of agreement sweeps through the crowd like a gust of wind. They want to protect the child. They want to defy the symbol. They want to believe erasing the mark will erase the danger. You step forward to help, but a sudden movement at the alley mouth freezes everyone. A figure stands there, silhouetted, motionless, lantern held low. A doctor. Dr. Godfrey, coat torn from the riots, eyes bruised from the Strand, face gaunt from sleepless nights. He moves closer, raising his hands in a gesture that is half peace, half surrender. "I'm here to help," he says quietly. "Nothing more." The crowd tightens, retreating instinctively. Someone spits. Someone else steps behind Mrs. Bell protectively. The doctor stops several paces away, understanding too late that his presence is poison in this alley. "I heard there was a sick child," he continues. His voice wavers. "Please, let me see her. I can—" But Mrs. Bell recoils as though struck. "No," she whispers. "No, you're not taking her. I'm trying to save her." The fisherman raises his lantern toward him. "We've seen your kind save," he says bitterly. "We've seen the bodies afterward." The doctor's shoulders sag. "Those people were already dying. You expect us to believe that?" Silence presses into the bricks like a weight. The doctor looks at Mrs. Bell with something like helpless sorrow. "If I walk away," he says softly, "your daughter may not see morning." Mrs. Bell breaks. Tears spill down her cheeks. Her hands tremble violently. "I'd rather she die with me," she whispers, "than disappear with you." The alley falls silent again, heavy, suffocating. The doctor nods once, slowly, as though absorbing a blow he always expected but never learned to brace for. "I'm sorry," he murmurs. "More sorry than you know." He turns, walks away, his lantern bobbing through the fog until it vanishes like a dying star. The crowd exhales at last, tension releasing in ragged breaths, but the relief is hollow. Mrs. Bell presses her forehead to the cold cobblestone, sobbing as her neighbours gather around her. The chalk X remains smudged, but visible, a symbol of fear, not medicine. A lie that has become truth simply because too many believe it. And as you watch the alley settle into a haunted quiet, you understand. Tonight, the truth tried to enter the alley, and the alley refused it, buried it, sent it away to wander the city like a ghost. Because in London now, fear is not just stronger than truth, it is the only thing anyone trusts. Evening settles over Southwark like a bruise purple, heavy, spreading across the sky with the slow certainty of something that cannot be stopped. The Thames below churns in muted shades of iron and ash, swallowing the last traces of daylight. You walk toward the narrow wooden bridge that crosses one of the smaller inlets near the riverbank. Nothing grand or remarkable, just a footbridge known mostly to fishmongers and children on errands. Tonight, it is the center of a gathering storm. A boy stands in the middle of the bridge, small, thin, barefoot despite the cold, his shirt hanging loose over a frame far too slight for his age. His hands grip the rail so tightly his knuckles glow white in the dimming light. His breath trembles visibly in the air, and around him on both sides of the bridge stands a crowd of neighbors who don't dare step forward. They are not afraid of the boy. They are afraid of what he carries. He has the look, the pallor, the tremor in his limbs, the faint blue tinge beneath his fingernails that whispers cholera with undeniable clarity. The sickness has claimed him. But he is not alone. On the far bank, a man stands, shouting, red-faced and frantic. "That's my son! Let me through! You can't keep me from him!" Two neighbors hold him back, not unkindly but with firm, desperate hands. Their faces bear the haunted look of people who have already witnessed too much death. "Jacob, listen," one pleads. "If you go to him, if you touch him, there's no saving either of you." The father strains against their grip, voice cracking. "He walked out the house. He's scared. He needs me." His words fall into the air like broken glass. The boy looks from one end of the bridge to the other, eyes wide, hollow, shimmering with tears he cannot wipe away. He doesn't call out. He doesn't move. He simply watches the two halves of the street argue about who should risk stepping forward. A woman nearest you crosses herself. "He must have heard the carts," she whispers. "Thought they were coming for him." And so he ran, straight to the bridge, the only place where he could place distance between himself and the home where his younger sister had died just days before. No one chased him. No one dared. Now he stands suspended between two worlds, family and fear, love and suspicion, life and the edge of death. A midwife arrives, breathless. Mrs. Finch, the same midwife who spoke the truth about water. Her face is pinched with worry as she pushes through the crowd, ignoring the hands that try to stop her. "That boy needs heat and water," she says. "If you leave him there, he'll die alone." But the crowd murmurs in panic. "Don't touch him. What if you carry it back? You'll kill yourself. They'll take us all if you bring him back into the street." Fear coils tighter around the people on both sides of the bridge. The boy's knees buckle. He grips the rail, dizzy. Mrs. Finch calls out gently, voice trembling but certain. "Come to me, love. It's all right. You're not alone." The boy lifts his head. His eyes fix on her, recognition flickering there. She delivered him into the world 8 years ago. She's helped half the mothers in this district. She has kept more children alive than any physician. For a moment, it feels as though he might step toward her, but then someone shouts from the crowd, "Don't you dare." He's marked. The boy flinches as if struck. Mrs. Finch freezes. The crowd presses forward with renewed panic. Inside that single word marked lives every rumor the city has birthed in the last weeks. It means doomed. It means dangerous. It means chosen for the cart. It means untouchable. The boy's lip trembles. He backs away a step, terrified of himself, terrified of the people who fear him more than the disease eating at his body. Mrs. Finch ignores the shouts, takes a step forward. "Sweetheart," she whispers, "you are not marked. You are a child. Come here." The crowd erupts. "You'll kill us. You'll bring the sickness back. Don't let her touch him." Someone stop her. 2 men grab her shoulders, pulling her back just as she reaches the first plank of the bridge. She struggles, voice ragged with fury and grief. "Let me go, he's dying." But they hold tight, fear stronger than compassion, stronger than reason. The boy watches this with a fading clarity, his final anchor to the world cut from beneath him. He sinks to his knees. A soft gasp escapes the crowd. Even the river seems to quiet. Mrs. Finch sobs, reaching toward him despite the hands restraining her. "Please," she whispers. "Please, someone." But no one moves. No one steps forward, not even his father, who breaks into bitter, helpless tears. The boy curls inward, forehead resting against the cold wooden plank. His small frame trembles, his eyelids flutter, his fingers slip from the rail. And then, stillness. The crowd holds its breath. The father screams. Mrs. Finch collapses to her knees, hands tearing at the cobblestones. The boy does not rise. No dead cart came for him. No doctor marked him. No hand reached to take him. Fear did that. Fear alone. As the lanterns gutter in the cold wind, the bridge stands empty once more, its wooden planks bearing the imprint of a child the city refused to save. And you understand, with terrible clarity, London is no longer dying of cholera. London is dying of itself. The night over Wapping is sharp and metallic, the kind of cold that bites through wool and stiffens breath. The river shivers under the moon's pale reflection, carrying with it the faint stench of refuse and something heavier, fear fermenting on the water's surface like spoiled wine. You move along the narrow lane toward Old Hermitage Stairs, where the houses jut out at odd angles as if trying to lean away from the river. Tonight, a strange glow rises between those houses. Not torchlight, not lantern flame. Something steadier, something alive. You hear shouts before you see their source, raw, panicked cries threading together into a coarse, rising wave. As you round the corner, you find a knot of people pressed against each other, their faces washed in flickering amber light. At the center of the street stands a small 2-room dwelling, its thatched roof already crackling with fire. Flames lick up the side wall, glancing off the window glass before bursting into the rafters. Smoke coils upward in thick black ropes. Sparks scatter across the cobblestones like dying stars. Inside that burning house is a woman, and she refuses to come out. Her name is Ellen Price, widow, washerwoman, mother of 1 buried child. She is known for her quiet labor, her soft eyes, her silence in the face of hardship. But tonight, she stands in the doorway of her home, gripping a wooden ladle like a weapon. her face lit by the blaze at her back. The crowd shouts for her to run, to jump, to save herself, but she shakes her head. "They marked my door," she calls out, voice cracking. "I'm not leaving. They won't take me." Her fear strikes the crowd like a blow. Someone gasps. Someone crosses themselves. Someone whispers that she must have seen doctors in the alley. But you see the truth woven into Ellen's face. She isn't frightened of fire, or death, or the sickness creeping through her body. She is frightened of hands that might carry her away before her last breath escapes on its own. A fisherman tries to push forward, but neighbors grab him, afraid the roof will collapse. The fire snaps and bucks, angry and determined. Ellen coughs, the sound swallowed by the roar behind her. The flames bloom brighter, and then the real horror becomes clear. The fire did not start by accident. Someone lit it. Someone threw a torch through her window. Someone believed removing the sick before they contaminate the street was an act of mercy. Ellen Price refused to leave, even when smoke began to fill her lungs, even when the rafters sagged overhead, even when her skirts caught at the hem. She stands now like a monument of grief and defiance. A priest arrives, breathless, clutching his book as though it's barely holding him together. He tries to get closer, but a beam falls, showering sparks across the street. He calls Ellen's name. She only shakes her head. "I won't go with them," she says. "They took my Isaac. They're not taking me." The crowd turns on itself, then some shouting to put out the fire, others demanding she be left to her decision, others insisting the doctors never touched her son at all. The conflicting voices collide in chaos. A constable arrives too late, shoving through the crowd. "We have to pull her out," he yells. But the neighbors resist, not out of cruelty, but out of terror that contact with her will doom them all. They grip his shoulders, pull him back, plead with him not to throw his life away. The constable curses them, shoves them aside, tries to run toward the door. The roof groans overhead. Ellen looks up. The moment is impossibly long. Wood cracks. Fire roars. The ceiling collapses inward with a thunderous bloom of sparks. A wave of heat slams outward, forcing the constable to stagger back into the arms of the very people who held him moments before. The flames leap hungrily, devouring the doorway, the windows, the last air within the house. Ellen Price vanishes behind a wall of fire. The crowd stumbles backward, silent, horrified, powerless. No one cheers, no one curses, no one speaks, because they all understand the terrible truth. Ellen Price did not die of cholera. She died of fear. Fear so deep it convinced her that the fire behind her was safer than the hands waiting beyond her door. A woman kneels in the street, sobbing into her apron. A man stares at the flames with empty eyes, whispering a prayer that sounds more like an apology. The constable stands stiffly, breathing hard, soot streaking his face. The fire burns on, crackling through the night, as if devouring more than wood, devouring trust, devouring reason, devouring the fragile thread that once tied Londoners to their healers. And you feel it, heavy, as the smoke drifting across the river. The city is no longer trying to survive. It is trying to choose how it dies. Night lowers itself over Holborn like a curtain stitched from coal dust and damp wool, heavy enough to dull the glow of every lamp along the street. The fog tonight is thick, thicker than usual, rolling low over the cobblestones, spilling between the alleys like something alive and searching. As you step onto Fetter Lane, the world feels hollowed out, as if London itself is holding its breath. Because tonight, behind one dimly lit window on the second floor of a narrow brick house, a doctor stands alone. Dr. Lionel Graves, bookish, quiet, rarely seen without his spectacles, was once the kind of man neighbors waved to from doorways. A physician who walked at steady pace, who never raised his voice, who brought warmth to cold rooms simply by showing up. But tonight, his silhouette in that window trembles. Tonight, he knows the city that trusted him has turned its face away. You move closer, drawn by the faint glow. The curtain is half drawn, leaving a sliver of light on the street below. Through it, you see Graves pacing, stopping, pacing again. His hand shakes as he presses it to the window pane. His breath fogs the glass. His room is cluttered with medical texts, vials, maps of water routes, evidence of a mind trying desperately to understand the sickness tearing through London. Below, a crowd gathers. Not a mob, not yet, but something on the edge of becoming one. A handful of men, at first dock workers, apprentices, fathers with sleepless eyes. Then women, shawls gripped tightly, their faces pale with exhaustion. Then children, clutching each other for warmth. Their lanterns glow like small, shivering suns beneath the window. Their whispers curl upward through the darkness. Is he one of them? He marked houses, they say. He was seen taking notes. Look, he's watching us right now. Rumours sharpen under the weight of grief. Rumours become hooks that lodge deep in the ribs. Dr. Graves pulls back from the window as someone points upward. His silhouette wavers. You imagine his heart pounding, wondering if he should blow out the candle, hide in the shadows, flee out the back door. But he does none of these things. Instead, he steps forward again, closer to the sill, closer to the people he has tried so hard to save. A woman's cry pierces the night. It is Mrs. Darby, whose infant died 2 nights ago. Her grief has become a raw wound, open and festering, and tonight it spills out into the street. You said he'd live, she screams, pointing at the window. You said my boy had a chance. Dr. Graves freezes. His hand lifts hesitant as though he means to open the window and answer her. But he does not, perhaps because he knows anything he says will be drowned by sorrow. Perhaps because every explanation he has tried to give in these past days has been twisted into accusation. Someone else steps forward, Mr. Cole, whose brother was taken to a fever house before dawn. He never came back, Cole shouts. Not even for burial. What did you do to him? The crowd stirs. A few lanterns sway. The energy swells like a tide hitting shore. You see it in their faces. They are frightened. They are wounded. They are desperate for an enemy they can touch. And the window above them holds the shape of a man too exhausted to defend himself. Dr. Graves slowly unlatches the window. Gasps ripple through the crowd. You feel the shift, raw, electric, dangerous. He pushes the window open only a few inches, enough for the cold to rush in and his voice to slip out. I never harmed your kin, he says softly. I've done nothing but try to keep you alive. His voice wavers but does not break. It is the voice of a man already grieving the city he loves. Mrs. Darby sobs harder. My boy trusted you, she cries. And he died anyway. Graves bows his head. I know, he whispers. I'm so very sorry. But sorrow is not enough. Sorrow does not silence fear. Sorrow does not bind a city unraveling thread by thread. A stone arcs upward. It strikes the shutter beside his head and clatters to the street below. The sound is sharp, sharper than the crowd means it to be, and it slices through the night like a blade. Dr. Graves flinches. A child screams. Someone shouts, "Don't let him escape." Hands grab another stone, then another. Lanterns swing. Voices rise. The tide is turning. The window is no longer a window. It is a target. You step forward, desperate to halt what you know is coming. But the crowd surges before you can speak, their grief gathering force. Dr. Graves closes the window, not in anger, not in fear, but in acceptance. The candle behind him flickers. The curtain falls still. Outside, the first real roar of the night builds in the throats of the grieving. Not yet a riot, but moments from becoming one. And as the crowd presses up against the brick, hands reaching, voices splintering the quiet, you feel the truth settle like ice in your spine. London is not hunting doctors anymore in isolated corners. It is coming for them openly, publicly, like a city that has forgotten what healing even means. And tonight, the doctor at the window maybe the last physician left in Holborn who still dares to face the street. Fog settles over the city like a shroud, thick enough to blur the gas lamps into trembling halos and swallow the edges of rooftops whole. The streets of London feel abandoned in the way battlefields do after the last volley, quiet, cold, waiting. You walk slowly down Fleet Street, boots tapping against stones slick with night mist, feeling each sound echo too far in the hollow air. Because tonight, for the first time since the riots began, London is still, not peaceful, not calm, just still. A silence heavy enough to crush breath. You reach Ludgate Hill and see what has caused it. A line of people stretches from the church steps all the way to the market. Hundreds of silhouettes, motionless as gravestones. They stand with their backs to the burning ruins of the Strand lodging house, their faces turned toward the distant river where the dead carts are no longer moving. No one shouts, no one curses. Grief has wrung the city dry. On the church steps stands something unexpected. A doctor, not hiding, not running, not trying to reason with a crowd that long ago stopped listening. Just standing. Dr. John Snow, coat damp, face drawn, hands empty. A man who has spent months tracing invisible killers through streets that refused him. A man who removed a pump handle to stop a river of death flowing upward from the earth. A man almost swallowed by mobs more deadly than cholera itself. Tonight, he faces London with nothing but his breath. Beside him stands Dr. Graves, the man from the window, alive, barely, saved by parishioners who hid him in their cellar until the street emptied. His cheek is swollen purple, his spectacles cracked, but he stands, holding a lantern whose trembling flame reflects in his eyes like a last remaining piece of belief. Word spread quietly, carried by those who refused to let truth die, carried by those who saw children collapse in the streets not from poison, but from water drawn from the wrong well, carried by the midwife who risked her life to speak the pattern aloud, carried by neighbors who realized too late that their rage had been misplaced, but refused to let that be the city's final note. So tonight, people have come, not in fury, not in faith, but in exhaustion deeper than bone. Dr. Snow steps forward. He lifts something into the air. A pump handle, blackened, scarred, cold. Not a trophy, not a weapon, a symbol. Fear has taken enough from us, he says quietly. The words carry in the stillness, let it not take what we have left. He speaks of water, of wells, of the invisible world beneath the city that has betrayed its people without intention. He names the pumps, names the patterns, names the truth. So many died, refusing to hear. But what matters most is not what he says, it is what the crowd does not do. They do not shout him down, they do not throw stones, they do not surge forward with torches. They simply listen. A woman sobs softly near the front. Beside her, a man removes his hat, pressing it to his chest. Farther back, a child clutches his mother's hand and stares at the doctors not with fear, but with something more fragile. Recognition. Dr. Snow lowers the pump handle. Dr. Graves sets the lantern at his feet. The light trembles but holds. From the edge of the crowd comes a quiet voice. What do we do now? Not an accusation, not a demand, a question. The city waits for an answer. Dr. Snow turns his face toward Ludgate Hill, toward the shadows of homes where families huddle around empty hearths, toward the pumps that still threaten them. We live, he says, together, not against one another. A long silence follows, a silence that feels like breath returning after being held too long. One by one, the people step forward, not to riot, not to rage, but to hand their grief back to the night. Someone kneels, someone lights a candle, someone places a torn blanket at the church steps as tribute to the ones they lost and to the ones they harmed in their terror. And just for a moment, just one, London stands together, not healed, not whole, but no longer tearing itself apart. The fog begins to thin, the lantern steadies, and you feel in your chest the faintest spark of something that has been absent for far too long, a beginning.